Man, do we have a lot to get to today, and it's a lot to unpack. It was right after yesterday's show, shortly after. I got home. I can't remember what I actually ran some errands after the show yesterday and got home and was getting ready actually for this weekend's IndyCar finale. And I get a text from somebody that says, season over. And I thought, are they binge watching a TV show that I'd asked them to fill me in on?
Jail,
yeah, on Reels Network. And right then is when, so I actually turned on John and heard him talking about JuJu Brents. And, now that we've had time for kind of the dust to settle on that, we can talk about the first in what probably inevitably will be a series of, injuries that take place, knock on wood. I mean, you hope not, but the reality is that you are always going to have players that are in and out on your roster and changes that can be made. And there are a lot of webs to be weaved throughout that. And we will get to that over the course of today. Good afternoon to you. My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison's voice you just heard. It is Query and Company here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Had a lot of fun yesterday on the program by just getting the thoughts, the viewpoints of those of you talking about the Colts and your overall thoughts and reaction. I have a feeling we'll probably do some of that today. Jimmy Cook's still out on paternity leave, essentially, for a couple of weeks. We congratulate him on that. And there is plenty to get to and talk about, and I promise you we're going to do that. But if you could lend me 60 seconds or so for something that has nothing to do with the world of sports that I thought about on the drive-in today. And what I'm about to say, there are people that are far more skilled at talking about it or touching on it than myself, but I just do think that it is important to say. I always think about Melissa Dwyer. Now, I would not expect anybody here to know the name Melissa Dwyer. I did not know Melissa Dwyer. I've never met Melissa Dwyer. And I'm somewhat certain I'm saying her last name correctly. I hope I am. It's spelled D-O-I. I believe it's Dwyer. But Melissa Dwyer to me is representative of a large group because Melissa Dwyer is the one, to me, there is no one that is more heartbreaking than any other, but it's the one that connected with me because Melissa Dwyer was a young woman who lived in New York City, who, when she was trapped inside the World Trade Center, used 911 to call the 911 operator, not even to ask how to get out, not even to ask when the fire department was going to get there, but simply to ask the 911 operator to get a hold of her mom, to let her mom know how much she loved her. And it always struck a chord in me. I've read, I believe her mom might have been, I don't know where, I may have read this over the course of time, but I think her mom might have been, say, like a second-generation American. That's irrelevant. Simply to say this, in that moment, Melissa Dwyer didn't think about differences with coworkers, didn't think about differences with college roommates, didn't think about a bill that needed to be paid. In that moment, Melissa Dwyer thought about what was most important to her, and that was that the most important person to her knew how important they were to her. And it was, of course, after 9/11 when I first heard that 911 call. It has always resonated with me. She has always been kind of symbolic, I guess, of the overall human spirit that was attacked, but at the same time, in its own odd way, exhibited that day. I will never forget, on this day, around this time, almost exactly, I was working at Channel 6 at the time. I went into work. I pulled into the parking lot, and my colleague Glenn Welling was sitting in his car, just incredulously, as I think we all were, and we didn't know if we were going to be doing a newscast that day, if nobody knew what the protocol was going to be. And I remember Glenn Welling looked at me, and I looked at him, and Glenn and I he's a wonderful guy. I mean, we were close in general, but he just looked at me, and I'll never forget what he said to me. And he said, everyone is the same team. And I've never forgotten that. And I said, you're right. And as awful as today was 23 years ago, it also was the ultimate display of the strength and spirit of this country when it's unified. And the short term following that, the way that everyone collectively came together to remember what it is that makes us the American people. We go on about our lives, we go on about our duties, we go on about our rooting interests, we go on about our sports teams, we go on about our bills and our disagreements, and sometimes we lose sight of that. But it's almost like there is an external force every year on September 11th that makes the sky as blue as it was that day and makes the sunlight as golden as it was that morning. And yes, I know part of that is just the natural evolution of the seasons, and it's going to be the same temperate season every September 11th as it was the year before. But by and large, each year the day seems to look exactly like it did on that day in that moment when everything changed. And while 99% of that change was atrocious, there is that 1% that also reminded all of us what really does matter in life. And it's my hope that when you look at the sky, the golden sun, and the reflection upon that today, that we can still invigorate what it was to be united and to be as one as people in the greatest country in the world. And none of us will ever forget that day, and the people that we lost. And so long as those of us that are walking the earth are around to continue the memory and the legacy of those that perished, then I think it's our duty to do so. So for me, it is Melissa Dwyer, and I think of her today. The Colts yesterday got the news that JuJu Brents is going to be out. Now, Eddie, I guess what we don't know is this, and that is JuJu Brents out for the year, or is JuJu Brents out for maybe the year, but we're going to wait to see towards the end of the year if he's available?
So Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network reported yesterday when the story broke that he would be done for the year, but Mike Chappell and James Boyd reported shortly after that his potential return would determine on how the surgery went. Now, I don't know if he's had surgery yet or not. I'm sure it'll be either today or at least tomorrow, but we don't know how long JuJu Brents would be out. The earliest he would return would be mid-December, I believe was the term that was thrown out between Mike Chappell and James Boyd yesterday on Twitter.
So my suspicion is, by the way, that they are going to wait and see. Listen, the surgery, one of the things that happens, let's go back to the timeline here on JuJu Brents. I think it's very easy for all of us, myself included, to say, wait a minute, JuJu Brents suffered an injury against the Houston Texans. Why did he finish the game? Why, if he was playing in the game, why can't he continue to play? If he was doing interviews after the game, why didn't he mention it? If Shane Steichen came out in his opening statement and started the press conference by saying, Buck's got it back, and we'll look at that, and that's it. What in the world? Well, this does happen. I'm not a pro athlete. And there are probably a lot of us. The other day, I was walking along, and all of a sudden I'm like, holy cow, like the inside of my knee is like super sore. Like it almost feels swollen. Kind of had like it gave a little bit. I mean, I'm 52 years old, right? Did I have a strain to a ligament in my knee? I have no idea. And I'm not by any stretch of the imagination pretending that my knee goes through the rigors of a professional athlete that is in their early 20s. What I'm getting at is it's possible that something like that took place, but we're not going out and exerting our body to the level that is necessary to play a professional sport. So you are fine-tuning. There's a difference between how often you pay attention to every little single like clank in your engine when you're driving your Jeep Grand Cherokee to work, and how much you pay attention to that when you are running in the fourth place of the Indy 500 with one pit stop left to go, right? I mean, there's a difference there. And one of them, a professional athlete, you are paying attention to every little sound. So after the game is probably when he said, by the way, my knee is swelling up, And sometimes that takes a while. Sometimes it's once the movement is over with, then all of a sudden the swelling happens, whatever else. The challenge on the timeline of surgery is that, in particular, if you have, and a strain, by the way, with a ligament, a strain simply means that there is like a partial compromise or tear. It's just not torn all the way through. If there's, say, 6 fibers of a ligament, 2 of them are torn, that's a strain, etc. So a lot of times they've got to wait for any natural swelling to go down before they can get a true measure on how severe the injury is, or before they can go in to do the surgery. Then, of course, every single body is different in terms of recovery time. There are some athletes that are just super quick healers. I've told the story before about interviewing Marshall Faulk after a game in St. Louis when I was covering the Rams, and he had a wrap on his knee, and I said, "Oh, did you hurt your knee in the game?" And he said, "No, on Tuesday I got it scoped." What? On Tuesday, I went in and I had a scope done. They went into my knee and cleaned out some loose particles. On Tuesday, it's Sunday. Some guys just heal fast, right? Other guys, there's a ton that goes into that on just how long it takes your body to heal. So we shall see with JuJu Brents whether or not he is out for the year, whether or not, he's going to be back in 8 weeks, et cetera, et cetera. But I got to thinking about this aspect of it. And that is, it's very easy. The easy narrative here, which is one that admittedly I've been on for sure. The easy narrative is to be like, what are you doing? This is the position room. And I saw it yesterday. I saw it from afar, across the board. Literally. In the old days of the grocery store, when you'd walk in the grocery store, this was pre, social media and all of the different apps. In the old days, you'd walk in the grocery store, and on the right-hand side, they'd have the little community board. Cat sitter needed. Tuesday, November 1st to Tuesday, November 8th. I'm mowing lawns now. Call me here. They'd have all these little Post-it notes up there, right? In today's day, if those things still existed, every third thing would say, why did Chris Ballard not go out and get corners? Everybody in town, anywhere you went, was like, why in the world did the Colts not get defensive backs? And it's an easy thing. And listen, I've been the king at times of piling onto the easy narrative. I've been the king at times of piling on like I said, the pile-on narrative, right? If you look at the Colts defensive backfield right now, where a player is selected does not automatically equate to how good they're going to be, but it does give you indication how much a franchise has been willing to invest in said player. Now, let's look at the Colts defensive backfield as it stands right now. Okay? You've got Jalen Jones. He was the 221st pick in the year he was drafted. You've got Samuel Womack, who they got as a free agent. He had been selected in the 5th round when he came out of college. You have Dallas Flowers that was undrafted. You have Kenny Moore, who was undrafted. You have now on your practice squad, Kelvin Joseph, who was a former 2nd-round pick, but not by your franchise. You have Ronnie Harrison, a 3rd-round pick on your practice squad. In terms of your safeties, you've got 2 3rd-rounders and a 7th-rounder. Now, that's not to say one of the things that you can look towards if you are defending that strategy, when were the Colts selecting? This is a franchise that has not been necessarily a bottom feeder traditionally. It's been kind of stuck in that mediocrity of the vat of suck for a while. And so that means you're drafting somewhere, 17, 18, 20, 22 in round number 1. Elite level shutdown corners are not the type of position typically that go 3, 4, 5 deep in a draft. So you could certainly make the argument that if you look at it, there are 2 ways to look at it and say, they've invested nothing. They've got 7th rounders and 5th rounders and undrafted free agents out there. Ridiculous. This is malpractice. Or you could say, well, when they had top 30 picks, they used it on a quarterback or a receiver or an offensive lineman. And because they knew that a corner in round number 5 was not that big a differential from a corner in round number 2. It may be a position that if you look at it and you evaluate, Eddie, give me an offensive player off the top of your head.
Are you talking about
position,
on the Colts?
Just a position.
Running back.
Running back. So if you look at running back, they may look at it and say the top-level running back that if we're in the market for a running back, and that's obviously one that you don't typically spend in the first round, but we'll use it for this equation. If they look at that and they go, the top-level running back is a 9.5, and then by round 3, you're down to a 6.5, and I know I need a running back in this particular draft, and there's going to be one available to 9.5. There's too big a drop-off at that position for me to not take it there. Whereas they may look at corner and say, you know, the top corner is a 9.5, but I don't have where that guy's going to go. And then after that, the next corner available, it's an 8, a 7.8, a 7.6, a 7.4, a 7.2. So the longer that I go in taking care of other positions, I'm not getting as big a drop. So I can take one in rounds 5 or 7. Kenny Moore is a good example of it because he's probably their best defensive back. Well, Julian Blackmon's pretty good, I think. But Kenny Moore in the nickel, you know, he was an undrafted free agent. I mean, this is a guy that, and not for the Colts, but he was not drafted, showed that he had potential, and then they get him in from New England. The point being, there are two ways to look at it. You can certainly make the argument based on the eye test that they have not invested enough in that position, at least in its core. But this year, in the offseason, it was what everybody was jumping up and down about. Literally. I go in to get something to eat. I love 317 Burger. Love it. Usual Suspects is the accompanying bar. It's right on Broad Ripple Avenue across from the Firehouse. They have the best turkey burger with Swiss, and the bar itself is just awesome. It's like an old-fashioned kind of dingy lit bar. It's absolutely, I love everything about it. Literary quotes on the wall, I love it. And one of the things I love about it is it's a really quiet place to go and just have a cold beer and a burger. It's awesome. But even then, if you're sitting there, and because it's kind of a smaller, quaint environment, if you can overhear conversation, you might hear somebody and somebody's like, what are they talking about? I can actually hear they're talking about the fact the Colts need a corner. And then I leave there and I stop at the grocery store on the way home, and I walk up and somebody comes up and like, hey, real quick, I got to ask though, are the Colts going to get a cornerback? When is Ballard going to invest in the back? This is what everybody in town's been talking about for a year. And you ever been to Vegas, Eddie?
I have indeed.
I know that you laid over there when you met Pete Rose and you inexplicably had a baseball in your pocket, right?
That's right.
So you met Pete Rose and you just happen to have a baseball in your pocket and you're like, oh, can you sign my baseball? Right?
We were on our way back from Seattle. We went to a Mariners game, and I got a ball at the Mariners game, and I had it in my
Did you
backpack.
buy the ball or did you get a foul ball?
I got it from the catcher in the bullpen.
The catcher in the bullpen threw you a baseball?
Yeah.
Don't they usually do that for like 8? Was there an 8-year-old around you?
No, it was a ball that was scuffed, so they just threw it out.
But I mean, were they trying to throw it to a kid in the crowd? And
surprisingly enough,
the kid?
there were no kids watching Frankie Montas warm up. It was all adults and Reds fans.
Okay. So you had a baseball and you saw Pete Rose and you got it signed, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So when you're in Vegas, have you been to a casino in Vegas?
No, because I've been there, I think, twice. I was under 21 both times.
Okay. So the casinos in Vegas, one of the things that you hear everybody going crazy and cheering, and you're like, what's going on? And it's people at a craps table. And there's one guy, and he's got like this little rake that looks like it might be kind of a nice back scratcher, but it's actually supposed to, like, I don't know, he's pulling dice. I don't know how to play craps. But there's always one person that's rolling the dice in the craps game, and everybody's betting on that guy, I think, and he's either the most loved guy in the casino or he's the most hated guy. I can never figure it out. But you can always tell when a guy rolls the dice, they're like, oh, he's on a heater. This guy's on a heater. Because everybody's going crazy, a huge crowd, and then he rolls the dice, and for whatever reason, he comes up empty, and everybody goes, oh. And that's kind of what being a Colts fan heading into this year felt like with the defensive backfield. Suddenly the Colts, everybody was talking about, areas of need, and they need a quarterback, and they need receivers, and maybe Chris Ballard's on a heater. Looks like he might have gotten himself a quarterback. Looks like they got a really fast wide receiver from that everybody talked about, that this guy's going to be great in A.D. Mitchell, and they got 7 different tight ends now, and Jonathan Taylor's re-signed, and Anthony Richardson's able to uncork 65-yard passes while he's falling backwards on coconut husks, and this guy's on a heater.
I need to correct you. It's organic coconut husk.
My apologies.
I forgot to do that yesterday.
As opposed to non-organic?
Correct.
Like lab-made?
Or artificial, it's organic coconut
It's not
husk.
like those lab diamonds. It's the real deal, right?
Yes.
So, but Chris Ballard, everybody's standing around watching it with him at the corner, and they're hoping that the heater, and so he threw the dice, and is it possible? Is it possible that after one of 17 games that the dice that he rolled just came up empty? He was rolling the dice by not going with depth at the cornerback position because he had to have 6 tight ends, or he had to have 10 defensive linemen in the trenches. That's the easy narrative, right? The easy narrative is to jump up and down and say, what in the world is he doing? And I absolutely have teed off on Chris Ballard before. I've made fun of his kind of used car salesman. Nothing against used car salesmen. I like used car salesmen. That's a bad stereotype. Snake oil salesman. How's that? That's better. Just his showmanship. Batty eyes, his southern drawl, his charm that he can throw out there, the 5 o'clock shadow, all that. I have kind of mocked that before and said, proceed with caution.
The flat brim hat?
The flat brim hat is a big one. And listen, I'll wear a flat brim hat from time to time. I'm not going to lie to you, but I think I said on this show, Eddie, I owe Chris Ballard a thank you, because as a 52-year-old guy, I occasionally would wear a flat brim hat and think to myself, like, this looks pretty good. And then I see it on him and I go, yeah, man, it's over. It took me a while to realize that, but it's over. But I have a couple of things in terms of, and this is a big buzzword for today in the American culture, fact-checking. If I fact-check myself in regards to Chris Ballard and the debate about cornerback, I actually went back and looked at it and discovered a few areas where I, in fact, needed to fact-check myself to be fair and balanced. And I'll do that coming up in just a couple of minutes. I also wanted to point this out, and I am in real need here of some help. And this, again, when you talk about rolling the dice, I'm either going to come up empty on this or this is going to help me greatly. If you go to the Twitter X, @JakeQuery is my Twitter handle, @JakeQuery, @JakeQuery. Now, I got into a debate with Derek Schultz that you know, Eddie, as well.
That's right.
Derek somehow or another tried to claim that he has a greater sex appeal, all like 5'1" of him and body hair and everything else, that he has a greater sex appeal than myself.
I saw this poll. I did not vote.
Just an overall coolness factor.
Did you vote on it?
Of course. I think that you have to take into consideration that I am, 10 years older than Derek. So there has to be a little bit of a curve on which this is graded. But even still, our friend April, who's been a wonderful listener of this program and is a friend, April decided to take it to the people and let them vote on who is, as she words it, the sexiest middle-aged stud muffin. Now, that seems a little much, but just which of the two of us just has a better cool factor? Which of the two of us has a more sexiness between myself and Derek?
Cool factor, I would give it to you. I'm not answering the second part of that question.
Well, I mean, Derek looks like an Ewok. I mean, come on. Now, if you go to my Twitter account, it is the top right now. I just reposted, re-X'd, retweeted, whatever you want to call it.
Reposted, yeah.
I just got it out there where you can vote, and you are required, since I'm the one that is being courteous enough and putting myself out there enough to let you know. I'm simply asking that people go on there and vote for me. She simply says I'm tall. And then here's the thing. This is why I'm asking, I'm taking advantage of the platform to try to skew the vote. Because when she asks it, her two options are Jake, and then in parentheses she put he's tall, Derek, and in parentheses she put duh. Well, that's leading the voter, right? I mean, this is voter fraud, essentially, is what this is, right?
It's bias.
It's election fraud bias. Thank you very much. But speaking of bias, it might have existed with me with Chris Ballard, but I had to fact check myself. And I did it with Chris Ballard's words, and it might not have gone well for me. I'll explain next. So JuJu Brents going to be out for a while. Colts did make a move. And by the way, Rick, I appreciate you calling in. We'll probably revisit the significance of today coming up in the later hour of the show. So, Rick, since you're hanging on, I wanted to let you know that it would probably be more in the 2 o'clock hour when we will get to that. And I appreciate you calling in if you're listening right now. Now, the Colts have made a couple of moves with JuJu Brents, going down. They have signed cornerback Kelvin Joseph, as I'd mentioned, a veteran, former second-round pick, to the practice squad. They also added safety Ronnie Harrison to the practice squad. So, they're trying to build some depth in that area. And as I'd mentioned, it seems like the easy narrative to jump up and down about the fact that the Colts did not sign corners in the offseason or address it or draft them or stockpile at that position. Somebody else said, Jake, it's not even the easy narrative. It's the obvious one. Shane Steichen had the following to say just a couple of minutes ago out at the complex about the Colts' lack of signing cornerback depth.
No, he came back from it, and unfortunately he got hurt again, so that was just a tough break. You can't predict injuries, and just part of football.
That was Shane Steichen talking about whether or not they should have been more concerned about JuJu Brents' health history, but here he is talking about whether or not they, in hindsight, should have addressed and why they didn't address the cornerback room.
In this league, it's next man up, and I got a full faith and confidence in every single person in that room, and Dallas and signing Sam Womack and those guys. I think, they got a great opportunity in front of them, and I got full faith and belief in those guys for sure going forward.
So I looked it up last night, and I mentioned this earlier. Next man up. We always hear that, right? Oh, it's next man up. I've covered so many professional sports teams that it's the most predictable thing ever, right? As soon as a guy's hurt, well, it's next man up. We just got to go next man up. We believe in, iron sharpens iron around here. It's next man up. Okay, I get it. What else are you going to say? And last night I was sitting there thinking to myself, what is their overall depth in the defensive backfield? They got a 7th rounder at corner. They acquired late in the offseason through free agency a guy that had previously been a 5th rounder. They're starting an undrafted free agent. They're using as a nickel an undrafted free agent. They've got a pair of 3rd rounders at safety. They've got a security and safety with a 7th rounder. Man, not a lot of at the top talent there. But again, is it a position where you can find players in rounds 3 and 5? Is a 3rd to 5th round level corner the same level of talent you get at a 1st or 2nd round receiver, etc.? But as I was thinking about all that, I thought back to something Chris Ballard said when the roster was complete, with the exception of the minor tweaks that they make at the bottom of it after the final cuts were made. And he went back to one of our favorite things to nitpick, in particular when he did the morning show with Kevin. Take a listen.
I guess time will tell. I feel really good about our fronts, man. I do. I think we're really good up front. I think on both sides of the ball, you could say this is probably our best front teams. I think the skill now, they're young, but I do think we're really skilled. Bowen ought to at least be freaking happy for once. I got heard about beat over the head with wideouts forever. I think it's a good team. I think it's a really good football team. Now we got to go perform.
Okay, so once he had a team that he was happy with, especially in the fronts, meaning in the trenches, and that is an area that he has emphasized and emphasized and emphasized and emphasized. As a matter of fact, there are times where his flat-brimmed hat actually blends all the way down to his neck because he's blue in the face, telling you about how much he's going to be strong in the trenches. But I think he made an interesting point there when he said, Bowen, meaning Kevin Bowen, we played it all the time when he's like, every time I turn around and look, Bowen, freaking Kevin Bowen's talking about receivers and writing about receivers. And everybody in this town was saying, why don't they go out and sign a wide receiver? And it did prove costly to them. So he eventually addressed it. And he re-signs Pittman, and he drafts Josh Downs, who looks like he's going to be a good player when he's healthy, and he drafts A.D. Mitchell. And, we forget about Ashton Doolin that's got speed. So they got some playmakers there, and they finally feel good about that position. So there's a little of both sides of the coin here. Part of it is, okay, he did, it might have taken a while, but he eventually addressed the situation. And I wanted to push in when I heard that and go, see, this is why everybody was telling you to address the cornerback situation, because everybody was telling you to address the wide receiver situation, and you avoided it and told everybody you were smarter than they, and that's why you didn't need to do it, and you mocked the fact that people talked about it until all of a sudden it was a major Achilles that cost you, and now you want credit for addressing it when everybody in the city knew that that's what you should have addressed. And that's where I was going to go with it. But I kept hearing something in my head. I know that's shocking. But as I was laying there, you ever had this happen, Eddie, where you're laying in bed and you're about to fall asleep and you don't think that you're falling asleep, but then all of a sudden like some really weird thought comes into your head, and then you have this moment of clarity where you're like, well, I know because I'm pretty sure that I was just thinking about riding a unicorn down Capitol Street that I must have been starting to dream. And you realize that you're like starting to fade away. Right about that time when that was happening to me last night, and I was thinking about all the things and all the fabulous points I was going to make and all the great facts that I had on why Chris Ballard was guilty of malpractice and Chris Ballard was guilty of oversight, and this was an example of Chris Ballard's arrogance, and this was a reason why Chris Ballard was showing that he shouldn't be trusted with building the roster. Right when I was ready to prove all those points and hammer home all of those things and be the voice for the Colts fans of the city that are jumping up and down today and are driving their car and saying, see, we told you this was going to happen. We told you this was going to happen. I heard this in my head, and it's the voice of Chris Ballard talking about the cornerback room and the defensive backs that he had going into the season.
They're young. They're going to continue to get better. Sometimes you got to be able to meet, like things don't always work out, even when you're trying to acquire a player. I'm not saying we didn't try to do some things. Sometimes it just doesn't happen. But we do think we have good young talent back there. And we have a lot of belief in our front. So we'll continue to let these guys grow and come on. They don't become players without playing. I mean, I think sometimes we forget that. You know, they got to play.
Okay. He's right. He's right. In the end, he's right. If you go to basketball, why are people in this town excited about next year's Pacers season? Who was the key player for the Pacers last year, meaning the season that just ended, Eddie, that did not play the vast majority of the season?
Benedict Mathurin.
Okay. By Benedict Mathurin not
Jarvis
being
Walker
on the floor, that meant more minutes for who?
Andrew Nimhard.
And what happened?
He excelled. He flourished.
So now you bring Benedict Mathurin back and you think to yourself, oh gosh, this is the found $10 bill in my pocket while I was doing laundry. We would not have known Andrew Nimhard was that player if he hadn't gone out and played. A second-round pick.
Or even Ben Shepherd.
Who both played well, got into rotation, and became good players. And now you look at the Pacers, and why are people so bullish on the Pacers? Why are people so excited about the Pacers? They are because of the fact that you have somebody on the roster coming back that you know as a known entity, and he is joining a deep roster with two guys that showed what they could do and became players because they played. And in terms of the defensive backfield, while it's easy for me to sit here and jump up and down and say, Chris Ballard is a moron because he didn't address this situation. Chris Ballard's flat-brimmed hat was pulled down so far down below his eyes that it ruined his peripheral vision and he couldn't see what was oncoming. That's the easy thing to say. But, and believe you me, I'm not here to carry water for Chris Ballard. However, I kept going back to that quote. They can be players, but they got to play. And that's when it dawned on me, you know what? He has to know what he has here and trust that he has guys that can develop. And maybe this year anyway, we all know, nobody wants to admit this, but everybody deep down knows this year is all about the development of Anthony Richardson. It just is. And the Colts are going to be what Anthony Richardson grows into, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be that roller coaster, man. There's going to be moments that are unbelievable, and then there's going to be moments where you're like, oh, gosh. And the oh, gosh moments hopefully become fewer and further between as time goes on. But you've got to let him play to learn that. And anything that happens in terms of them playing and winning games is gravy, because this year, at its true core, everybody knows it, is about the development and the process of learning what they have in Anthony Richardson. So with that, you have a cornerback group that we can sit here and jump up and down until the cows come home, that they didn't go out and bolster it, and they didn't go out and get veterans, and they didn't go out and retain certain players, or they punted too early on trading players at that position. Except for that, he probably thought to himself, I can go out and get a 2-year Band-Aid. But why go out and get a defensive version of Matt Ryan? Why go out and get a defensive version of an Ahmad Bradshaw, somebody that is just holding down the fort for 2 years and keeping Andrew Nimhard and Ben Shepherd off the floor? The time is now. Yes, it is entirely possible that we look at it and that we say that Chris Ballard and his dice came up empty. And there are a lot of people that want to say that right now. And it still may be the case, but what I'm saying is the dice are actually still spinning. They have yet to hit that back foam wall, and the price is right when you roll those two big dice that truly determines how they're going to end up. Because these young guys have to play. And he's talking about, and JuJu Brents is one of those he was talking about, don't get me wrong. But he's talking about, how good a player is Jalen Jones? How good a player is Dallas Flowers? What can they get out of Samuel Womack? That's what he's talking about in terms of you've got to see how these guys gel together, and you just don't know until you do it. And JuJu Brents, you hope, comes back, and I think, again, I'm bullish on JuJu Brents. I love his size. I love his athleticism. I love his tenacity and his confidence. Lot to love about JuJu Brents. And of all the guys that it's the most disappointing to lose, he might be the one that's the most, because they invested a decent amount in him when you look at where he was selected and what they gave him and everything else. But I just think he can be a player. He's played well when he's had chance to. He just hasn't had an opportunity to get solid footing. And that's probably the guy that Ballard was most talking about. But if you are building a franchise, you're believing in a franchise, you're rooting for a franchise, that means that you are agreeing to do so 1 through 53. And you have to have belief. Now, as a fan, you don't have to. But as an executive, at its core, at least publicly, you have to have belief in all 53 of your guys. And when you are finishing a roster, you have to have conviction in guys 50 to 53, probably more so than any other, because those are the guys that you most have to believe in. And if those guys are not as naturally gifted and talented, I'm talking about players 49, 51, 52, 53, if those guys aren't as naturally just walk out of the box skilled, ready to push and play like the guys that you've got on your roster 1 through 5, then what they need more than anything probably is the confidence that there is belief in them. Nothing's going to be gained by Chris Ballard coming out going, yeah, man, we did kind of screwed up. This Dallas Flowers, I mean, he's, what do you want me to say? He played at Pittsburgh State. He's undrafted. He checked a box. I mean, he filled some time for us, but deep down, I'm not totally confident we can go with him. No, you can't do that. The time is now. The time is now. And when I sat there and thought about the fact that the easy facts were that Chris Ballard didn't address the situation, and the easy facts were that his experiment blew up on him, and the easy facts were that the dice came up and it's empty, the reality is then I had to fact-check myself. And when I fact-checked myself and I sat down at the little counter and I had the little thing, I realized that the facts say that Chris Ballard said, we don't know until these guys play, and that process is just beginning now. And now is when we find out.
I thought you made a great analogy last week with it, Jake, about raising a kid. You go through elementary school, you go through high school, and now this is Chris Ballard sending them off to college.
Yeah, right? I mean, That's exactly correct. Like, you know, when you go away to college, my parents have told me a million times. I went to University of Kansas. They dropped me off in Lawrence, and my mom said, Jake, your dad and I hadn't even gotten to Kansas City yet. We looked at each other and said, this is going to be a disaster. And I said, why didn't you tell me that? And she said, because it was up to you to figure that out. And you were either going to learn from it, or it was that's part of the process. And that's where we are. That's where we are. By the way, Fever in Action, Debbie Antonelli going to join us coming up 1 o'clock, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, 13 minutes from now. Now, listen, I'm going to have to shout this, I guess. Debbie Antonelli coming up top of the hour.
You didn't shout it.
Well, no, I'm about to shout this. So if you go to my Twitter account, and I'm blatantly – listen, I know what's going on here. People are they're playing games here because they know that I'm campaigning. There's no way that anybody can consider Derek Schultz to be a better-looking and more handsome man than myself. But the poll itself that April did, which I have now on the X Twitter, at JakeQuery, JakeQuery, it's the top – you go to my Twitter account, it's the very top question. Derek, at this point, and only 9 people have voted since I mentioned it earlier. Hit the button and vote for me, please. 44% I'm getting. He's getting 56%. That's so askewed. There's no way. I don't know how many burner accounts he has, but apparently it's a decent amount. Right? Isn't that right? Clearly that's what's going on.
I did give you a vote, so I was one of the 9.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you. The Fever are in action. This is a big one tonight, right?
Pair of big games coming up. They have Vegas twice in their Final Four. They have them tonight and then again Friday night, and then Dallas on Sunday.
And Washington to close things out. That would be a week from tomorrow night. Only 4 games left. Fever have won 8 of 10. And obviously Caitlin Clark has been a huge part of that. She has been a huge story. She
was named Eastern Conference Player of the Week again for the 3rd consecutive week.
I was going to say, and I know that people think I'm crazy when I said I don't think she's the most valuable player, but I think she is going to get votes for that now, and who would have guessed that 2 or 3 months ago? Debbie Antonelli might have. She's the TV analyst for the Indiana Fever, and she joins us next. About that, Eddie, Debbie Antonelli is native to South Carolina, right? Or lives there, I think. and has a child at Clemson, even though Hootie and the Blowfish are South Carolina. I mean, it's like a big rivalry thing, right? But Hootie and the Blowfish are basically the John Mellencamp for South Carolinians. You know, they're like a rite of passage for the state. And for those of you that are unaware, the last time that we talked to Debbie Antonelli, I was proposing to her the dilemma that I was in of the double billing of weekends, if you will, where I had bought tickets for Shannon and myself to see Hootie and the Blowfish in Nashville. We also had already previously agreed to see Alanis Morissette here in Indy, and I knew that Shannon deep down probably wanted to see Alanis Morissette, and I was asking Debbie Antonelli her opinion on what to do, and Debbie is the one that said, you got to go to the Hootie and the Blowfish concert. And I don't think that we have talked since, Debbie Antonelli, who joins us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. And I thank you for your time. And we're going to talk about the Fever, who are obviously playing really well. But I want to let you know, I don't think we've talked to you since the big dilemma. Now, do you recall the big dilemma that I was in with Hootie and the Blowfish in Nashville and Alanis Morissette was here at the same time?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I hope I gave you some sound advice and you're still married.
So here's the thing, Debbie. Now, to be fair, I mean, basically common law married, but 19 years together, but not actually technically married. But yes, same thing, right? We did make a decision, and I weighed heavily your opinion on it. You recommended that we go to see Hootie and the Blowfish, but also at the same time, 19 years of being together does mean that compromise has to be included. So if you had to guess, would you like to guess which way that we ended up going in terms of our dilemma?
I'm guessing you lost and she won.
I will tell you that Hootie and the Blowfish in Nashville, Tennessee was one of the best weekends that we've had. It was awesome.
Good.
They were great.
Awesome.
You're exactly right. It was like it just was like being together with 15,000 friends around a campfire. It was awesome.
Yeah,
awesome
those
time.
guys are fantastic. I'm so glad you went. And, of course, Nashville's a great setting for Hootie and the Blowfish. Come on now. That's awesome.
It was great. There's no question about it. All right, speaking of awesome, look, Caitlin Clark's been exactly that, but I don't want to sell the Fever short because it's been more than that. They've won 8 of 10. This is obviously big with 2 in a row against Las Vegas. It's been a benchmark team within the league for certain. But I wanted to begin with this question for you. Because we talk so much, understandably so, about Caitlin Clark, tell me the player that is most either benefiting from Caitlin Clark's comfort level in the WNBA or, better yet, perhaps, the player that Caitlin Clark is most benefiting from on that roster.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I'm not going to bail out on you. I'm going to give you 2 because Kelsey Mitchell has been able to get off the ball some, not have the primary defender every night, and look what she's been able to do. She is having a time of her life. She is playing her very best basketball, and it took some time for her to make that adjustment along with Caitlin. The other player that I think Caitlin's benefiting the most from is Aaliyah Boston. I think because Boston has become so efficient in the short roll, making decisions, very good decision maker, whether it's to reverse the ball, pass, drive it. She is becoming more confident. She is running the floor harder. I think all that short roll action and those early drags have allowed Caitlin to, have that many assists because Aaliyah can finish around the rim as well. And when you throw it in there, Aaliyah, Boston demands a double, but it's hard to double, so you go single coverage on her, and she can score on anybody in the league inside. So those 2 players, I think, have benefited the most from Caitlin.
Debbie, when you look at, it's fairly unprecedented. I mean, in terms of in the middle of a professional sports season for everybody to just take a month off and for the Olympics. And then they come back from that, though, and they win 8 of 10. Now, is that what took place during the Olympic break? And I genuinely don't know this. I mean, I don't know, did they continue? You got players that had different areas in which they were going out. What has allowed them more than other teams to be able to really come together after that time off?
I think a lot of it has to do with chemistry off the court. I think a lot of it has to do with repping the schemes defensively, making sure that, everyone understands all the techniques and all the scheming and personnel and all those things that come with defending. I do think they are a little bit better of a defensive team. They're not a great defensive team, but they are really good offensively. They've got the best offensive percentage in numbers since the break. And I think a lot of that just has to do with chemistry. Everybody accepting, this is the way we're going to play. This is what we need to do to win. And I think they've come together at a very high elite level that's allowed them to have the success.
Is Caitlin Clark a dynamic, quick trigger outside shooter that ability then allows her to exploit defenses by making great passes? Or is she a great passer that defenses have to anticipate that first, and that then facilitates her to occasionally be able to mix in a quick release shot?
Yeah, I think if you ask Caitlin, she would say she's a pass first. I think her scoring and the space that she creates around their offense allows them to make the reads and the cuts. If you don't have that kind of space, you can't be that kind of passer. So I think because she shoots it so well, so deep, and is so dynamic, which is exactly a great word, she's on the top of the scout. You got to guard her 10 feet off the three-point line. And that opens up a lot of space for all the cutting and all the action that you see off the ball. I think she'll tell you passing. I'm going to tell you it's her scoring.
Debbie Antonelli is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Of course, the television analyst for the Indiana Fever. I don't know if you saw this, Debbie, and I apologize that I don't have the website in front of me, but there was somebody recently that did a survey of every broadcast team in the WNBA, and you saw who was number one, right?
Yeah, we saw it, yes.
Pretty darn cool, right? You and Pat Boylan, number one in the league, right?
Yes, thank you. You know, it's first of all, I've had a long career in the game. I love it. I'm having the time of my life, just along with Kelsey Mitchell. I mean, this is incredible. For somebody who's been in the game as long as I have, for 37 years calling games on television, this is incredible. I mean, this is what we'd hope for. And to get to be at this point in my career, to experience this in the women's game, I can't imagine anything being much better than this. And then to be a part of Pat Boylan and Kelsey Casper's early parts of their careers and watch them, because they're both terrific young broadcasters. And I think we make a great team. And I would be remiss if I didn't count, Woody in the truck and Jamie directing, who put our team together, and Marika, who does all the graphics. I mean, we are unique in the W in that we all travel together and call games on the road. Nobody does that. That's how big this package is. That's how important this package has been to the Fever. And that is a really nice recognition by the fans out there. And it was awful announcing that was the site. So we're really proud of it, but we're really proud of the team that we put together.
So here's the thing. The site is awful announcing. The announcing is not. That's what we want to make sure that everybody knows, right?
Right.
Debbie, one of the things that is interesting when you talk about, the length of time that you've been around the game, I think sometimes we lose sight of this. What we are seeing now is, for the most part, an entire league of players who have known no other than a professional women's basketball league, because, you are now seeing, Caitlin Clark grew up in a world where the WNBA was something she could watch. Cheryl Swoops did not, for example. So with that, how has the game itself changed? Not necessarily stylistically, but maybe even schematically. Or is the women's game still, from a scheme standpoint, what it was in the early years of the WNBA?
I think the game has evolved overall in the NBA as well. I think the college game has evolved. I think what we're seeing is more race to space. Okay, you're sprinting with incredible pace up the floor, trying to get the space so that you can get into some concepts and some actions. It's not a lot of play calling. It's really read and react, a lot of response. And that's why when you sprint the floor, you open up opportunities. And if you don't have a lot of play calls, that's when the game slows down, or when you're running a dead ball situation out of bounds. Otherwise, to me, the IQ of the players, the fitness of the players, when you look at the women's game, you got to go all the way back to the early 80s, mid-80s. That's the best field goal percentage in the history of college basketball, okay? That's how good the game was back then. And incidentally, that's when I was playing. But I'm a shooter, so I know that number, right? The way the WNBA has evolved is absolutely incredible. The pace is the most impressive thing, and the skill set of the players. It's not just long, athletic, can run and rebound. It is being able to score at all three levels, and you can be 6'5", 6'6", and you can score at all three levels, and that's what makes the game really progressive.
Debbie, I really thought, and I think a lot of people did, at the beginning of the year, I thought to myself, boy, this Caitlin Clark is an incredible entry passer to getting the ball to operating areas for an offense. And this is going to be huge for Aaliyah Boston, and the offense is going to flow through Aaliyah Boston. Now, what we have found is, in particular now that the Fever have really hit their stride, the offense truly does kind of flow through Caitlin Clark. But yet, I think it would be easy to look at Aaliyah Boston and say, because her numbers haven't exponentially risen from year one, that maybe she's not as effective a player. And I think that would be a really naive statement. She might even be a better player because of, I'll use the word sacrifice that is necessary there. How mature has Aaliyah Boston had to be through the gelling process, and then also at the same time being a go-to when it's needed and one that has delivered when needed?
Let me say this about the team collectively, and not just Aaliyah. That first 20 days where they played 11 games and they're on a 1-8 start, and everyone's going, uh-oh, what does this look like? There were some major adjustments that had to take place. I said these at the top of your show or the beginning of my interview with you. Kelsey Mitchell adjusting to getting off the ball. Aaliyah Boston played in an incredible system at South Carolina that allowed her to play with her back to the basket, constantly in a crowd. There's no defensive 3-second rule in the college game. In the WNBA, there is. So you're not always playing in double teams, or teams don't have 10 feet in the paint. So you get to move and play freely, and Aaliyah plays more on the top of the key in the elbow area or the top of the floor than she does with her back to the basket. That adjustment was incredible for her, playing not just the screen and long roll, deep roll to the front of the rim. You're screening and you're short rolling, meaning Caitlin's getting blitzed, two are coming to the ball. Caitlin has to get the ball out of her hands quickly. If Aaliyah long rolls to the rim, there's no time to get it there. That's where the turnovers were coming in the early part. Now Aaliyah catches in that middle third, and she can make choices with the ball, and she's excellent at making them. She's got range. She can shoot the three. Her maturity, definitely, and I would say her value is much more important than what it was last year. It's a much different-looking team than last year, and I would be remiss if we didn't mention the play of Lexi Hall and the decision by Christy Sides to go with Lexi at the three position, because she has guarded one of the top defenders or top players on the other team, and she also can shoot the three at a blistering clip at 70%. That affects Aaliyah's space, that affects Melissa Smith's space, and that affects what Caitlin and Kelsey can do as well. So this is a well put together, by design, hard decisions made during the break to make some changes, and I think that's part of the reason why you see Christy Sides as Coach of the Month in August.
Yeah, and with that, when you head down the home stretch, when you head down the home stretch like this, Debbie Antonelli, our guest on the Express Pro Tires and Auto Guest Line, 4 games left, and then obviously they put themselves in position to be a postseason team that, I'll be honest with you, Debbie, I'll bet if you were to privately survey coaches around the WNBA, Indiana would be very high on the list of teams that they would rather not see in the postseason just because of the way they've played. But do you continue or do you even keep, and I'll use a bad term since Las Vegas is the opponent tonight, do you schematically have an ace in the hole that you use down the home stretch or into the postseason, or do you simply go with what has been working for you and you don't break what currently has kind of been fixed?
I mean, there's some tweaks and some changes, in game. It might be screening angle, or it might be the acceleration through some set. But you're not, I'm sure Christy Sides has a few things left in the tank that she's hanging on to for the playoffs. But most of those things happen on the defensive end, not necessarily on the offensive end. There's no secrets. Everybody runs the same stuff. It's about personnel and making shots. As far as the playoffs go, Indiana has a win over every team in the league with the exception of Vegas. Vegas is 2-0 on Indiana now. They get them the next 2 games. I don't think it'll affect Indiana's seeding at all, but Vegas is going to come ready to play. It affects their seeding. They're trying to jump up a spot to make sure they maintain that 4 spot, or even maybe get to the 3. Indiana looks pretty good in the 6. They got the tiebreaker over Phoenix, and they'll have the tiebreaker over whoever finishes in the last spot. So I don't know if they can jump up to 5, but I kind of like Indiana sitting in the 6th spot as far as the playoffs go.
Okay, Debbie, before we let you go, I'm going to ask you a question non-Fever related here. You ready? I'm going to put you on the spot, and I apologize for that. I think the first conversation we had with you, and I'm circling back to it because I just think it's super important. You put together every year your 24 hours of nothing but net, where you do a fundraiser for Special Olympics. This is rooted in the fact that your son, I believe his name is Frankie, correct?
Yes.
who has Down syndrome and is a graduate of the Clemson Life program. For those that have listened to this program, we know about that. I'm a Clemson fan, and I love the fact that Clemson University offers life skill opportunities for people with Down syndrome and other challenges. But I wanted you to touch on, Debbie, because I think it's really important for people to hear. I saw the other day in Indiana that they're in need of Special Olympics coaches and volunteers. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in the travel baseball and youth sports and the 9 under, and look, my kid's signing a letter of intent to play for his 12 and under travel baseball team. And we get so caught up in the competitive nature of rankings and all of those things that we lose sight of the fact that there are some kids out there that still have the true essence of sports, which is simply being their best them. And their best them is the most important thing versus our interpretation of what the best means. And I think we've lost sight of it. And I think it's important for people to realize. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to just share for people the fact that Frankie's best day sometimes might be something that you have a joy in the fact that his best day is more triumphant than other people's maybe even average day, and there's something to be learned in it. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to speak to people on the importance of that compassion and understanding.
Well, first of all, Jake, thank you so much. You know, this is a topic and a passion of mine. It's very close to my heart and my family. It's my why, my drive are my 3 boys and my son Frankie, who just needs a little more. And we need people who are willing to give him a little bit more. If you're a listener out here because you're a sports fan and you have a little bit extra time on your weekend, you will not believe the give back that you're going to get if you get involved in Special Olympics. It doesn't require a lot. It just requires a little bit of time that you're willing to help organize and help them socialize and teach them a skill and let them get some sport so that they understand the value of healthy living and making good choices. It's no different than those of us that have kids that are neurotypical. I want the same thing for my 3 boys. I want them to be happy, healthy, and included. And that's no different for Frankie, and it's no different for my other 2 guys. And if you're listening and you're a parent and you have some time, take your own kids to Special Olympics and let them experience. Take your kids to a Miracle League game. Let them see what baseball can do, what it means for those kids to get a chance to play, to be a part of a team. Because you're always going to be a part of a team no matter where you go. You're a team at work, you're a team at home, you're a team on a sports team. And those kids want to have the same feeling and sense of team also. And it is galvanizing, and it will make you better because they're going to give you more than you can ever give them. And all they're asking for is a little bit of time. My fundraiser for Special Olympics in 6 years, we're almost at $1.1 million. That goes directly to help athletes train, compete, organize, and socialize. That money helps programming. I want it to be in that area of Special Olympics because it matters, because I know exactly what it means. And, Jake, I can't thank you enough for giving me an opportunity to share that. Anytime, if you have a listener that is on the edge or bordering on whether they should get involved or not, tell them to call me. I will convince them to get involved because it's important.
The only injury one might have as a coach in Special Olympics is a sore palm from the number of high fives they're going to give over the course of the day. Right? Or maybe arm from all the hugs they're going to give, because that's the beauty of it, right? It's just about togetherness and celebration. And I think it's wonderful. And probably you're going to get tired of me asking you about it over the course of time because I think it's great. I also, Debbie, before we let you go, I need to thank you because last week I'm sitting there and I get this alert you're going to be stunned when I tell you this, Debbie. This dog and pony show here for the state of Indiana was nominated as a finalist. I think sometime in October they actually do the voting, but we were nominated as a finalist for Sports Radio Program of the Year. And I thought to myself, this must have been a down year for submissions was my first thought. But then Eddie sent me the clip of the audio that was submitted for the nomination process, and it included a prominent part of that was an interview with you. And so therefore I figured that the awful announcing, which we actually put the awful announcing on this show, but the awful announcing award that you received has vicariously now carried over, and you blessed us with that help, and so I appreciate that because that clearly is what put us over the top.
Oh, my gosh, you're kidding. That is absolutely amazing. Congratulations to you guys. We're going to have to celebrate together.
Well,
And I will tell you this. Listen, Jake, Frankie doesn't hug with his arms. He hugs with his whole body.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Since you're a Clemson fan, you know Dabo says this all the time. The only disability is a bad attitude.
Love it.
That's it.
Love it. And I love that program. And like I've said, I'm hoping that we can spread that here to the state of Indiana. Debbie, appreciate it. Tonight it is the Fever and the Las Vegas Aces. And my apology for asking, that's a 7 or 7:30 tip. Eddie, do you know?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock tip tonight. And the first of 2 with Las Vegas and then 4 to round things out. Appreciate it, Debbie.
Thanks a lot, Jake. Good luck. Congrats on your award, and have me back when the playoffs roll around.
All right, sounds good. We look forward to it. Debbie Antonelli joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. By the way, speaking of that, I had a story that I kind of stumbled upon that I'm going to do for you coming up in about 15 minutes. Because last night, again, when I had my Chris Ballard epiphany, I was sitting there and started looking over some things, and I stumbled upon my favorite word of all time is serendipity. Eddie, do you know the definition of serendipity?
No, Jake, enlighten me.
Serendipity, and I have no idea how that became my favorite word.
Or I should say, educate me.
What do we do on this program?
We entertain and educate.
We educate and entertain. We do it alphabetically if we could here. And we also, we don't really entertain at all, but we try to educate. Serendipity is the process, and I'm going to, if you could look up the definition of the word, we're going to test myself and see how good my definition is.
Can you spell it?
I can. Serendipity. 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 Thank you. Now,
that would have won you your spelling bee back in the day.
No, I was the 1984 Allisonville Elementary School spelling bee runner-up, and I got completely hosed with car fare. Okay, so serendipity, I'm going to say here is the Jake Query definition of serendipity, and then I want you to read to me the official online definition. But I believe that serendipity means the process by which someone comes across something accidentally while intentionally looking for something else. What is the definition according to the dictionary?
The occurrence and development of events by chance in a happy or beneficial way.
Okay. So in other words, you're looking for your car keys and you look under the couch and you find a $10 bill. You found the $10 bill through serendipity.
Or you're on the radio trying to find something to listen to and you stumble upon this show.
That's exactly correct, which is an unfortunate serendipity, but we do hope that it's a happy occasion, right? Okay, so with that, I serendipitously came across something yesterday because I was thinking about JuJu Brents being out for the year. I was thinking about what we talked about earlier with Chris Ballard, which we'll revisit here coming up in just a little bit, and Joel A. Erickson's going to join us at 2. But I was thinking about the Colts and the corners and some of the things that Chris Ballard has kind of stood by. And so I decided that I needed to do some research. Now, this doesn't happen very often, right? It's why it took me 34 years to graduate from college. But I decided to do a little research. So I got down to the brass tacks and started looking through articles and looking through things and stumbled upon an article that I thought to myself, now this is something that I absolutely, I found it, it's something I didn't know. I found it interesting. I found it inspiring, quite frankly. And so I just figured I'm just going to mention that on the radio tomorrow. So I'll do that coming up in just about 10 minutes from now. But what we do know in terms of the Colts from today, because I know people want to know about the Colts, Shane Steichen did say that, yes, in fact, JuJu Brents, is going to be out for a while, and used the proverbial next man up, obviously, and was asked the obvious question, which was, should you have thought about this? Should you have prepared for this? I understand his thought process, Eddie, and that thought process simply is, look, you're always going to have injuries, but you're kind of at risk if you go into the season like, well, here's how we're going to build our roster. We've got to have fallbacks at every area, right? The rule is that you go with the guys that you have on your roster, and the exception is that you don't do that once those guys are not available. And I think it's oftentimes safer to live by the rule and not by the exception. And that's what they did, and, it hurt them, right? It obviously hurt them.
It seems like every year there's something along those lines. Last year and the year before was wideout and edge rush, and it's just a constant cycle with underneath Chris Ballard. It seems like it's one area, okay, I'll address this. Then it's another area that I have to address the next year, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of forward thinking sometimes, and it's a lot on the here and now.
I think
in terms of like depth and trying to have kind of like what Green Bay has done historically with their franchise. They've always looked to the future with the quarterback spot. It feels like Ballard hasn't really looked forward to the future when guys starting. Anthony Costanzo, that whole situation is a prime example. He has the thought of retirement. He sticks around for 2 years, and then you wait a season to actually address left tackle. Then you go out and get Bernard Ryman.
But Ryman's been a good player so far, right?
Correct.
Now, you could make the argument that Ryman came to them somewhat serendipitously, right? They were probably looking for other positions, and then they saw him on film, and they're like, wait a minute, here's something that we came across. By the way, speaking of the Colts, and I don't want to jinx this. Do you believe in jinxes, Eddie?
Yes, I'm very superstitious.
Are you really?
Yes.
Give me an example of your superstition.
If you're on a winning streak, you got to do everything the exact same way. Starting in high school, it bugs Olivia to this day whenever we're at a sporting event and they're playing the national anthem. I sway. I don't know why. I always have. And it annoys her all the time. She goes, "Can you stop?" I'm like, "No, I can't." And then when I was playing, you never touch the line in baseball. I'd always put the left cleat in the left sock on first before the right cleat in the right sock. Same with the shin guards. Yeah.
What about in your day-to-day today?
I don't know. It's hard to be superstitious about stuff, in day-to-day life.
Okay.
You would have to be thinking about it, I think, in order to have a superstition in day-to-day operation.
So yesterday, and I don't want to jinx anything, so please, Eddie, refrain from divulging who I'm talking about, because you know.
Do I?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
As I have mentioned before, and I really do hope that we can pull this off for the entire season, I really enjoyed talking with Chris Chandler on Friday, the former Colt quarterback. Thought it was a fun conversation. It's been fun because we've actually texted back and forth several times since then. And as I had mentioned, I came up with an idea, I don't know, maybe a month or so ago, of trying to get a former Colt on the program each and every Friday leading into the weekend to get set for the Colts game. Part of the conversation being about what's going on with the Colts, and a big part of the conversation simply being a trip down memory lane with different players of yesteryear. Some more recent than others. Chris Chandler, you're going way back to some of the early years of the Colts. Some of them players of the Super Bowl era. Some of them players that, obviously not somebody that's, still playing in the league elsewhere, but you get the drift, right? Guys that you go, oh, man, and guys that were part of significant moments. Yesterday, so I had sent text messages or emails to I cast a wide net for players. Some got back to me, some did not. I think I told you that those that we have lined up that have agreed to do it, and coming up with the dates might be a challenge, but that have agreed to do it so far, I'm going off the top of my head, include Chris Henton, Tarek Glenn. I can't remember if Eric Dickerson maybe is one, etc. So you get the – Larry Triplett is one. So there's one player that's pretty prominent, and it's not Bob Sanders. I will tell people that because that's the Holy Grail. But there's a pretty prominent player of very good Colts teams over the years, and I had sent a message to said player, not heard back. So yesterday I just thought, I'm just going to go on a whim here and call. So I call, and the person says, "Hey, Jake, what's up?" And it startled me. And I said, "Oh, so you clearly had saved my number into your phone when I reached out to you, which is much appreciated. I didn't know if you would know who I am or not. I would not anticipate that any player would know me by name, obviously. And he said, well, I looked up you. I saw your message and looked you up, and I do recognize your face. which is about all you can ask for when, it's been a little bit. And this player and I talked for probably 10 minutes about a number of different things, including, I wouldn't say controversy, but just different aspects of involvement with the Colts, and a player that I always greatly respected. And after talking about it, I said, well, hey, would you be willing to come on this Friday? And he said, you know what? Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it. And I'm telling you right now, if I get the same candor Friday that I got yesterday off, just in shooting the breeze for 5 or 10 minutes, people here will absolutely love it, and it will be an interview that will have like articles written based on what he said. I guarantee it. Now, getting someone to follow through is one thing, and getting them to be as open when they know the mic's hot is another. But I'm telling you, either way, totally nice guy, totally fun guy, and it's going to be great stories, and I look forward to all of it.
I can't believe you got Ben Utech.
Ben Utech is one I reached out to. Not Ben Utech, though. But I did yesterday, while exploring Chris Ballard and looking up some things about the cornerback situation, which we're going to continue to talk about, I did serendipitously come upon an article that I found fascinating and inspiring, and I'll share it with you next. One of my favorite songs of all time, Eddie. Well played.
Thank you.
Several people, by the way, and it's much appreciated, just sent me the following. Hey, Jake, listening to your interview, I'd like to volunteer for the Special Olympics. Can you please send me the information? I will absolutely get the information out to people. This from our buddy Rick. Great interview. She inspired me to get involved. How does one go about doing this? I will get out the information to anybody that texts me, 317-523-9288. If you would like to get involved in Special Olympics and helping out, volunteering, coaching, I will get you all of that information because it is awesome. So I was looking over some stuff for the Colts last night, and I don't even know how it came upon that I found this article, but I found it fascinating, and I thought it worth sharing. That song's awesome, too, actually. I'm always down for it if you want to continue playing it. So I want to tell you the story of a kid named Jim. You know any Jims in your life, Eddie?
I do.
Last name?
Leisure.
Jim Leisure?
Yeah.
Laid back dude, right?
Yes, very cool. Nice fella.
Okay, how about Jim that as a kid grew up in the South and then later moved to Michigan? And at first, family members thought Jim actually was mute because Jim did not speak. And they brought in specialists and therapists. But what family members noticed was they thought maybe that Jim might have even had like some sort of well before probably this was in the mainstream, like maybe on the spectrum of some sort. And I'm going to read you a quote directly from Jim, and I will later state the site in which I'm reading this. Quote, as a small child, I would communicate to my family, or at least those who didn't mind being embarrassed by my stutter. But before that, for the first 6 years, quote, I did communicate only with animals quite freely, calling the hogs, the cows, and the chickens. They don't care how you sound. They just want to hear your voice. So once Jim began communicating around the age of 5 or 6, family members realized that Jim didn't speak a lot because Jim had problems speaking. Stuttering is painful, Jim said. In Sunday school, I'd try to read my lessons, and the children behind me were falling on the floor with laughter. By the time I got to school, my stuttering was so bad that I gave up trying to speak properly. So Jim decided instead of speaking that he would begin writing poetry as a way to express himself. I had started writing poetry in high school, and I had a teacher who liked one of them. Teacher came up to him and said, Jim, this is a good poem. In fact, it's so good, I don't think you wrote it. I think you plagiarized it. If you want to prove that you wrote it, you can stand in front of the class and recite it from memory. So Jim, wanting to prove that, in fact, he had written the poem, which he had, stood in front of the class and powered through it because he said, those were my words, so I just got through it. So his teacher came up to him and said, I'd like for you to continue reading poetry in front of the class. So he would work on reading poetry in front of the class because that was the time where he found that he could speak without his dreaded stutter. And he said to himself, I'm not going to say that I'm cured here, but simply that I worked my way through it. And in reading the poetry in front of the class, he realized that the teacher was challenging him not just to work through his stutter, but also to enlighten the other students about the power of poetry itself. And ultimately, Jim started reciting things not necessarily in the form of poetry, but rather in the form of a stage, and came out of his shell in being fearful once of speaking due to his terrible stutter. And as he said, it wasn't that he overcame his stutter and was cured by it, but rather that he began speaking to try to prove to others that they shouldn't laugh. The article that I found was from the Stuttering Foundation. and stutteringhelp.org was the website. Jim, who didn't speak for the first 5 or 6 years of his life, who spoke only to animals and with no confidence whatsoever in front of family as a young person to the point where they wondered what was going on. And then, because someone noticed there was an ability for Jim to be awakened and maybe push Jim out of his comfort zone a little bit, somebody saw that in him, and Jim began reciting poetry, raising awareness not just about poetry, but about the strength of his own speech and his own belief in himself. Later went on to recite some things that were written for him that people find pretty darn famous today. For example,
people will come, Ray. People will most definitely come.
Jim is James Earl Jones, who passed away at the age of 93 this week. But I found it fascinating, number one, that I never knew that. If it's common knowledge, what I just shared about James Earl Jones, my apologies. I didn't know it. Maybe one other person out there didn't know that about him. But the point being that James Earl Jones, as we now know him, obviously, didn't know of his ability to be able to speak until all of a sudden he had to do it. And I don't even know why or how it was that I stumbled upon that article, but I found it fitting and applicable because I found that article, I think it popped up as like one of the suggested headlines on something when I got onto a Google to look up some facts about the Colts cornerback room because I was thinking about JuJu Brents going down and how debilitating that was going to be for the Colts. And then once I read that article is when it dawned on me. Chris Ballard has a defensive back room that now is going to have to play. Jalen Jones is a 7th-round pick that probably a lot of people from a fan standpoint don't believe in. And he sees the headlines of people saying, like, they got to go out and get depth. They got to go out and get a strong, a better corner. They didn't get any players in the offseason. They didn't bring anybody in. Dallas Flowers was an undrafted free agent that made some plays, then struggled a little bit, but now has got to find some footing. Kenny Moore was an undrafted free agent when the Colts acquired him, and he's obviously been a good player for them. But the point being, I kept going back once I read this to Chris Ballard's quote in my head of, if these guys are going to be players, we're not going to know it till they play. And that's where they are in terms of their defensive backfield. We don't know whether or not these guys can play, and we're not going to know until they play. And sometimes when you put people in position, maybe even out of their comfort zone a little bit, you never know what sort of thing you might be unearthing. Do they have players that are going to have the greatness of the acting of James Earl Jones? Probably not. But the most important thing I took from that was not necessarily even a loosely veiled tie-in to getting it back into talking about the Colts, as much as I didn't always think this way. I haven't always been somebody that realized that there is a James Earl Jones within every gym. But I just think it's important to see it and recognize it in people. And I try not to do it all the time. I think probably it would get really old if I did it all the time. But I do think from time to time that when we have the blessing of being able to have the platform to opine on things, when I see something that I think to myself, you know what, this might be good for people like myself to hear this story, because it makes you stop and think a little bit about when you start to roll your eyes at somebody, maybe actually you need to stop and turn them around to look at yourself and say, okay, they're doing their best. They're Jim right now, but that might be James Earl. Everybody has their own things they're working through. Now, in terms of the Colts, I can see where they probably were fatigued by the constant criticism of their approach. And listen, if this thing goes south and Malik Willis on Sunday turns out to look like Dan Marino because he's throwing to a secondary that is absolutely inept and goes down and has no depth and no security blanket, no insurance about it, then yes, absolutely, I will be the first to sit here and say they erred. They screwed up, and this blew up in their face. And I know that that's the narrative that most people thought yesterday when JuJu Brents went down, and they thought it today when they got up there, like the Colts are screwed because they put themselves in that position. And they may well be. But I do think that it's worth giving them the chance still to get up in front of the class and recite what they've been told to see whether or not they can get it done. And some of these young guys, that's what's going to have to happen. And like I said earlier, did we know that Andrew Nimhard was this darn good, or was it because Benedict Mathurin went down and now all of a sudden it's like, this guy's got to play. So let's see him play and let's see what he can do. And now you're like, wow, okay. Now all of a sudden the Pacers are totally deep in an area where we thought they were totally void. Maybe the Colts will be as well. I don't think necessarily that's going to be the case, but we can't rule it out. Maybe I'm just an eternal optimist, and that would be the first time in my life I've ever been accused of that. But I do go back to constantly the quote from Chris Ballard when he said simply, listen, these guys got to play. And, yeah, he could have gone out and gotten himself, like a veteran to come in or whatever else, and that would have been nice to hold things down for a year or two. But then what happens? At some point, you got to have long-term guys, and those long-term guys sometimes have to learn how to walk before they're starting to run with you. Bottom line. 239-1070 is the telephone number. Your thoughts on it if you'd like. And then Joel A. Erickson joins us top of the hour. Here's a Jake Query confession. Third grade Jake Query during this music video was freaked out by the dude that plays the bass at the end during the because he had these weird glasses on and was an odd looking dude, and it was just weird. It was creepy. Totally freaked me out. Not as creepy as the scientist in the Thomas Dolby She Blinded Me with Science video, but close. 239-1070 is the telephone number. We've been talking about the Colts. Debbie Antonelli joined us, and we mentioned Special Olympics as well. Doug joins us on the program. Just figured we'd take a couple minutes to take calls with any questions or comments, Doug, and the forum is yours. Be kind if you don't like me.
Hey, I love listening to the show. I heard you talking about the Special Olympics, and I want to say I have a 16-year-old son that has Down syndrome.
Okay.
And he plays in unified sports in Brownsburg.
Okay.
Football, track that they have, and they are excellent programs for special needs kids. And I just think it's great that you are promoting this and reaching out and helping with this kind of thing. And I just want to say thank you. And I think it's great what you're doing. And if there's, any way to promote that and get it out there, I work for one of the local racing teams, and we're trying to do a suite for the Battle of the Brickyard coming up in a couple of weeks. And if there's anything, you can reach out to me, any way we can promote that or help it out. By all means, contact me.
So, Doug, just out of curiosity, so you're talking about the upcoming, it's an IMSA event, right, that's taking place at the Brickyard?
Correct.
Okay, and so do you work for an IMSA team?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and do they also have like an IndyCar and other ventures, or strictly IMSA team?
No, it's just strictly an IMSA team.
Well, here's the thing, Doug, two things. Number one, what is your son's name?
My son's name is Logan.
Logan, okay, so Logan's at Brownsburg. We had on, as part of a Feel Good Friday, I actually had on, I believe it was Avon, a gentleman that started Unified Sports. And for those that are unfamiliar, Unified Sports is where they take, special needs kids or those that like in Special Olympics that get to participate in sports representing the school, partnered with some of the kids from the school itself that are not in a Special Olympic program. And I think, to be honest with you, both kids, Doug, get as much out of it equally. You think to yourself like, my son's going to sign up and help out a Special Olympian. No. The Special Olympian's helping out your son just as much, right? I mean, it works both ways.
I would totally agree. He has met so many friends, and there is so many kids that have gotten involved with it as the partner side of it that have become friends with our families, and it's an unbelievably great program. I can't speak highly enough about it.
Well, Doug, I'll tell you what, I appreciate it. I love that and Avon has partnered with Brownsburg and a lot of the schools in the west side of Indianapolis to start incorporating more sports. I mean, they have, I think, basketball now, and they're doing a number of sports for it. I love the fact that you are involved in it. I love, as you know, obviously, when it comes to racing, to help out. What I would ask of you, Doug, is I'll give my number out right now, that you either text me and I know you're like on the phone, so you probably can't write this down, but 523-9288 is my cell phone number. So I always say, Doug, if you're a racing guy, you can remember this. May 23rd, which is 523, and then if you just simply remember Little Al and Rick Mears, 92 and 88, like that helps. But 523-9288, or you can always email me at jakequery@me.com. Easy to remember because it's my two favorite people, Jake Query and me. jakequery@me.com is my email. Send me whatever you have, and I simply I'm thrilled that you would reach out to me about that, and we'll see what we can't do to help out and promote something as a fundraiser for Special Olympics, because didn't anticipate necessarily with Debbie. I wanted to give her the platform. I knew that she had raised a lot of money out of Special Olympics, but I did see last week that they are in need of coaches for Special Olympics in the area, and if we can raise money and awareness for that, or just simply get people involved, anybody that reaches out to me, I will get them the proper information to let them explore whether or not it's something they might be able to help out with. So, Doug, I appreciate it, and go Logan. Go Logan for sure. Joel A. Erickson is with the Indianapolis Star. A lot of Colts news to talk about, and we'll do it next. here. I need a Hail Mary. On the Twitter survey, which I have as my top tweet right now, April has sent out that she believes that Derek Schultz, he looks like the fella from Lord of the Rings. He's got hairy feet. He's like 5'2", covered in body hair. She thinks he's sexier than I am. And then she says, she did a survey. Who is the sexier middle-aged guy? Jake, and then in parentheses she put he's tall, and then Derek, and then in parentheses she put duh. Well, I mean, that's leading the witnesses right there, right? I mean, that's clearly what we're looking at here is.
Not to mention, she didn't put any pictures of the two of you.
That's a completely unfair moderator of the debate here. It's not even fair. So I need people to go on there and please vote for me because right now Derek is inexplicably leading 55 to 45%. Derek's got a lot of burner accounts, though. Joining us now, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so based on that conversation on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. My understanding is Joel A. Erickson, and I'm only saying this, and maybe this will sway people to vote for me. The beer fairy showed up at your house, right?
The beer fairy did show up at my house, and not only did the beer fairy show up with New Glarus as promised, there was also a cream ale with one of the coolest like can designs I've ever seen, like an old school looking Green Bay Packers type thing. My brother and I have already consumed those.
Now,
did that very quickly.
Okay, so when I was leaving Milwaukee from the IndyCar race, because you are a Wisconsin native, and we talked on this show about the fact that I was going to bring you back some Wisconsin beer, because when somebody is away from home, occasionally they need a taste of home. And when I was buying, and again, I've mentioned before, the weird thing about Wisconsin is the beer section of their grocery stores are actually the size of liquor stores in the other 49 states. And I was buying the New Glarus, and I looked over, and there was this, as you mentioned, retro-looking beer that had a retro-looking Packer player, and I don't even know what the name of the beer was, but I bought it based strictly on the packaging. It probably is like the generic beer you see on Mama's Family, but I bought it strictly for the packaging. Two-part question, Joel, before we get to the Colts. Were you familiar with that kind of beer, and was it the worst beer you've ever had?
So I wasn't familiar. I actually can't remember what it's called either now off the top of my head. And it was actually pretty good. It was actually a pretty good. I think the cream ales can sometimes get kind of like weirdly bitter, and this one was not like that. It had a nice like malty kick to it. Yeah, really, really like that one.
Okay. All right. Well, noted. Okay. Now, speaking of a little bit bitter, Colts fans are exactly that over the fact that JuJu Brents is down. Let's begin with this. In your estimation, or from what you are hearing, the Colts are accepting the possibility that Brents will be out for a minimum of how long?
The earliest that he could be back, if he's going to be back, is the last month of the regular season. So you're talking like mid-December-ish, is my understanding of when he could be, if he is able to come back, when he'd be back.
The natural question that comes from people is, if this happened in the game, then how did he finish the game, and why did we not know about this until yesterday?
Yeah, so apparently when it happened in the game, it felt like something minor. You know, so one of the stuff happens that I think all these guys are dealing with, that, you know, you've got some pain, but it doesn't feel like something serious. That's what they thought. And Brents in the locker room after the game was not acting like a player who was hurt. He was, you know, not with trainers or anything. He talked to reporters. He seemed fine, but then apparently they did the MRI just to be sure that nothing was wrong, and it turned out something was wrong.
And when that happens, Joel, I guess the first question would be, do they determine whether or not it's something a guy can simply play through, or is it one of those where and I know that sounds like a dumb question, or do they simply say, we have to take care of this now so that it does not compound itself beyond where it is? Yeah,
I don't know this part for sure. The last two answers were based on reporting, but my guess is that there's something there's a tear, there's something that could either get much worse if it wasn't surgically repaired, or it would leave the knee, in a bad place going forward. The injury thing, it's weird. You do have these, because I think we've all seen injuries where a player goes down and it looks really bad for a second, or when they come off the field and they end up playing the next week. And then you have the opposite, which is something like this, where a guy finishes the game and they think it's minor and it turns out to be major. I've never really figured out what the formula is for trying to figure that stuff out. You kind of just try to describe what you're seeing. I didn't even notice that Brents was hurt. He played 66 snaps on Sunday, so he must have thought it wasn't that bad.
Joel A. Erickson is our guest. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. He, of course, is with the Indianapolis Star. He is you're at Colts camp or Colts practice today, right?
Yes, I am. Yep.
Okay, so anything else that jumped out at you? Let's start with this before we get into the cornerback situation. Any news or anything else that jumped out at you in terms of today that we should know about?
Well,
other than a train apparently coming just behind you.
Yeah, that's they got that airport over here. That's one of the planes flying overhead. Matt Gay is Shane Steichen said will be good to go today, which is obviously kind of remarkable. I don't know a ton about hernias, but my understanding is that he had surgery roughly 2 weeks ago, and he's supposedly good to go. So it's sounding like he's trending towards maybe kicking, which again we knew it was a game time decision last week. It's not surprising from that standpoint. It's just surprising from you would think that obviously kicking the way those guys stretch out their bodies would put stress on a hernia, but apparently he's ready to go, or at least to some degree, based on what Shane Steichen said.
Okay, the important part of that to me, Joel, is this. Kicking is one of those areas where if you are in a situation now where you already have attrition at an important position, then you need roster spots, quite frankly. In other words, it's another spot they can use to elevate somebody into the cornerback depth position as opposed to having the depth of a second kicker on the roster, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And they have a ton of options now. There's 4 outside cornerbacks on the practice squad now. Amir Speed, who's been a special teamer with the Colts, 5th-round pick Jalen Simpson, veteran cornerback David Long, who was signed last week, at the beginning of last week, and then they signed Kelvin Joseph yesterday. So they have a lot of options there that they could elevate to give themselves some depth at that spot if they so choose.
I was looking earlier, and I mentioned this point, Joel A. Erickson, our guest. The corner position, it's easy to look at it and go, man, what are they doing? They're trying to rely on 5th-rounders and 7th-rounders, et cetera. And then I got to thinking about it, and I thought, it might be one of those positions from a draft standpoint in most years that, yes, if you're going to get an elite one, you've got to do so in the top, say, 15 or 20 of the draft. But then after that, whether it's a 2nd-rounder, 5th-rounder, or 8th-rounder, the difference is fairly negligible at that particular position, and thus you can't necessarily put a lot of stock in where or how they were acquired. You agree or disagree with that?
Well, now that you mention that, just right off the top of my head, a corner that a lot of people thought the Colts would go after in the draft a couple years ago, Tariq Woolen, went and ended up going in the 5th round, and he's been very, very good in Seattle. Big, long, all the stuff you'd think the Colts would want from him. And then this guy they just signed, Kelvin Joseph, was a 2nd-round pick by the Cowboys, also long, tall, all that fast, all that stuff. And he's really had trouble getting traction in the NFL. So there may be some truth to that there's beyond the 1st round, beyond the top of the top guys. The other thing about cornerback is a position that is notorious for being fairly volatile in play year to year. If you're not talking about the top 4 or 5 cornerbacks in the league, or somebody like Kenny Moore, who obviously plays a very specialized role and is excellent at it. It's a spot where you have lots of one-off seasons where guys look really, really good and then don't necessarily replicate that the rest of their careers.
Joel, have they done, from what you have been able to see, have they done anything work-wise or discussion-wise to use and utilize tight ends more in the passing game? I know they only took 43 snaps, but 2 total targets for tight ends and 0 catches for tight ends for a quarterback that's trying to get some stability at the position, to me, was surprising.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think not just the lack of targets. I think the other thing that was very interesting and maybe speaks to a lack of
of prominence for the tight ends in the game plan is that Will Mallory was inactive. Will Mallory last year, if fans remember, he had 18 catches as a rookie. It was in like 150 snaps. Like he was productive last year with this coaching staff in fairly limited time. And the fact that he was inactive and, you have Drew Ogletree and Mo Cox up sort of suggests that they were kind of going into it without necessarily having the tight ends as a big part of the game plan. I think there's a way I think that you don't necessarily need to, because really in most NFL offenses, it's like 3 to 4 targets who are primary, and then everything else is sort of like the Ashton Dulin lightning strike we saw the other day. But they need Josh Downs back for the reason you just said. You want to have somebody working the middle of the field, the short routes that the quarterback really, really trusts. That's been Downs in the past. The tight ends, none of the tight ends have ever really gotten to that point, especially in training camp. I don't remember many big tight end days in training camp.
Give me the area of the Colts that was surprisingly more troubling than we expected in week 1.
No, the run defense. I didn't see that coming. And it sounds like Gus Bradley didn't either, based on our conversation with him yesterday. They went into that game thinking we've got to keep them from going deep. We can't let C.J. Stroud throw for 350 yards. So to do that, we'll roll back our coverages. We'll leave 6, more like 6 guys than 8 guys in up near the line of scrimmage, and we should be able to limit their effectiveness in the ground game. And it didn't turn out that way. They didn't limit their effectiveness at all. I'm very surprised. I don't think – trying to think. I can't remember outside of Derrick Henry any other back having a day like Joe Mixon did in the Texans running game did against a Grover Stewart available Colts defense in my time here. So they did some stuff. They did some stuff that's frankly concerning for this week too, because they kind of went horizontal a little bit to get around those 2 defensive tackles. They got the wide receivers involved. This is all stuff that Green Bay will and can and definitely probably will do on Sunday that they've got to get cleaned up. That Jaden Reed, talking about the wide receiver reverses, Jaden Reed from Green Bay just had a 33-yard touchdown last week. They love to run those guys. They're going to probably test them the same way, I would think.
By the way, Carry the G Cream Ale. That's the beer. Carry the G
There
Cream
it
Ale.
is.
Now, it says here it's the official beer of Cheesehead TV. Is this some sort of – you work in newspaper, I work in radio, and I bought you a Cheesehead TV beer. Is this some sort of a violation, you think?
That's a great question. I think Cheesehead TV is sort of one of those, alternate internet sites that has made itself into something.
You know what it is? It's 2 guys that are just sitting around. They're like, "Hey, daughter, I tell you, I don't know, the sturgeon they're biting this morning there." That's what it is, right?
I think that was a better Wisconsin accent than I can do, honestly.
I'm just telling you, oh, yeah. But I got the ice cabin ready to go there for mid-October. Yeah,
that's pretty strong.
Yeah,
my O's can get long. You start saying boat and stuff like that. But I have trouble doing the full thing like that.
Listen, that sounds like a caricature, Joel. You're from up there. That's not far off, right?
Well, especially over the way I thought of it, because I'm from up there. It's west central, but it's really probably just west north Wisconsin if we're talking about the rest of the country. And my area is not so much those accents, although the O's, every time we go up there and visit, my wife's like, "Man, you guys hang on to your O's forever." But the one you just did, you do get some of that over by Green Bay. I remember I didn't go to a Packers game with my dad until I was in college, and they were playing the Jaguars, and they sat down, and the guy next to us goes, "Oh, this matchup looks good. Brett Favre going to throw for 300 yards there today." And I was like, "Wow, we do sound like that."
Oh, yeah. No, you're right. Oh, yeah, there, I'll tell you. Okay, speaking of the Packers, that's obviously the matchup this weekend. There is no way – it's good that Green Bay holds on to their O's because that's what it's going to look like statistically in their passing game with Malik Willis, right?
Yes. Yeah, if they have trouble with Malik Willis, it's a really, really bad sign. The Packers have a ton of great receivers, with a different backup that would be, maybe dangerous. Like if they had even a Jake Browning level backup, it would be dangerous. But they don't. And I think Packers fans this week are probably saying what Colts fans are saying about the cornerback room. Why didn't we add somebody better than this? They said they thought that he was more accurate and stuff in the preseason, but if you watch that Friday night game, he was only in for 2 snaps, but it sure looked like the Malik Willis I've seen before. There was a misfire and then sort of an erratic scramble that led to a sack. My bet is that they're retooling their run offense, and they're going to try to run at the Colts and hope that they only have to throw. They have to throw as few times as possible. I could be wrong, but that's his lifetime quarterback rating is in the 48 range, which is about half of where you would prefer it to be.
Oh, that reminds me of the Lynn Dickey days. Yeah, right? I'll never forget that, boy.
It's the seamless way you slip into it that's getting me. I have to work my way up to it.
Yeah, listen, I told you, Joel, I had a roommate in college that was from the UP of Michigan, which is basically Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah.
His cousin came up to visit, or came down to visit, and I needed subtitles. But how do you ask somebody for subtitles when they're sitting right in front of you, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and if you're around it, you do pick up the accent. My roommate, for the first 3 years of college, is from Chickasha, Oklahoma, and I could still drop into the low kind of long thing that he used to do. It's just easy if you're around him a lot.
Wait, he's from where again?
Chickasha, Oklahoma.
Oh, Chickasha, yeah. Now, and how does a guy from Chickasha, Oklahoma, end up going to college with somebody from Wisconsin? What school did you go to?
I went to Missouri.
Okay, yeah. So basically halfway between the two, right?
Well, and he was at Missouri Rolla to play baseball, and kind of wrecked his leg, and so he just kind of moved up.
Now, was this a potluck roommate or was this an established roommate?
It started out. It started out that he came in the semester of my freshman year, but then we ended up. It's one of my best friends. We ended up living together for the next 2 years too.
Okay, that's cool. Now, so back to the running game. Look, Josh Jacobs can run the football, and we know that Green Bay is going to attempt to do that a lot. One would assume a ton. My concern, and I want you to tell me, Joel, if this is a valid concern. Joel A. Erickson of the Indy Star is our guest. I thought the Colts. I'm one of the few on this. I'm alone. I mentioned earlier that the organic coconut husk that was slipping C.J. Stroud all over the field actually came from the island in which I'm the lone inhabitant right now. And that island is that I didn't think that the defensive line was awful until they simply ran out of gas because they got nothing behind them out of the linebackers and the defensive backs. Your thoughts?
I don't think that that's necessarily too far off. I did not notice many plays from the linebackers at all in terms of filling. The safeties made some plays, but they were of the touchdown saving variety. I would agree with that. I thought that there were some spots where you felt like, okay, that defensive lineman has taken those 2 people, and this one's taken that guy. There should be a linebacker coming to fill, and it never came. And maybe that's the scheme stuff that Bradley was talking about, playing 6 in the front and rolling those other guys back. I would assume that in this game, given the Malik Willis of it all, that the approach will be the opposite. I would assume it's 8 people against the run, and we'll play the pass if we have to.
I love Zaire Franklin, and I know I'm not alone in that. I mean, just he's a good dude and a good story, and he's been a good player. But what happened in Week 1?
I don't know. I think to some degree the Texans did a good job of getting somebody to him, but on top of that, we've seen other people get their linemen to him before, and that's been one of his strengths, is the ability to get off blocks and make plays. Yeah, we just didn't really see it from him on Sunday. I totally agree with that.
Lastly, Joel, any changes you anticipate in terms of just, lineup-wise of things that Shane Steichen or Gus Bradley, whichever way you want to look at it, may do differently, of different personnel we might see against Green Bay than we did against Houston?
Well, I'm very interested in who's going to be the cornerback who replaces Brents. I mean, that's the obvious one, and I think it's pretty obvious. It's probably Dallas Flowers. I think there might be a Sam Womack chance. I'm very interested to see that because they don't necessarily play with shorter corners.
Well, hell, he's only been there for 3 weeks?
Yeah. But the fact that Flowers was inactive last week, Womack wasn't. Like they were willing to go there if the Brents injury had knocked them out during the game. That's interesting to me. And then I'm also interested to see, normally I asked Shane Steichen about this today, and in his way he kind of acknowledged that I was on the right track without saying anything that might give away things. But normally when a team starts throwing deep, you go, well, they're just going to play a shell now. Teams are going to play shell coverages, and they're going to focus on their one deep threat. I know A.D. Mitchell didn't catch any of them because there were some rough throws from Anthony in there, but he was open deep a lot. And, that presents a problem, I think, for Green Bay. I think it's pretty hard to put two defensive backs on both of the deep threats every time. And I'm curious. I'm going to be very curious to watch not only this week but going forward how they kind of use those two guys back and forth to make it difficult on defenses to like. Because if it's me, I'm watching that tape from last week and going, well, I can't let 14 get singled up against anybody because he blew past Derek Stingley on that big touchdown pass. And A.D. Mitchell also got Derek Stingley, who's supposed to be really good on a later route that they just didn't connect on. There's a piece of that deep threat offense that I'm really interested to see, given the choices that it looks like they're going to make defenses pursue. There's another plane flying overhead.
Oh, there we go. Yep. Okay. You could hear that one. Not as loud as the other one, but Joel, here's the thing. Before we let you go, so you and I don't know each other overly well, right? I mean, we talk. Basically, the whole world has been given glimpse of our interactions because it's typically on the radio, right? It's not like we hang out afterwards. But I want to let you know, and especially, like, I'm trying to win this battle on Twitter of people thinking that I'm sexier than Derek Schultz, which is like kind of like being the tallest member of the Lollipop Guild, right? But even with that, I'm trying to sway voters by telling them this. Like, I'm not a bad dude, and I'll give you an example why. I want to let you know what I did for you and for the carry to G-folk, okay? So
absolutely.
The store that I went to on my way out of Wisconsin was in Kenosha, which is right on the state line, okay?
Yep.
And I go into this store, and it's an unbelievable grocery store, Woodman's. It's incredible. But what I didn't know was this. They only take one kind of a credit card and debit cards. That's it, kind of like Costco does, right? Well, I didn't actually have my debit card with me, and I don't have it on my Apple phone. So I had two other kinds of credit cards with me that I use, and neither are accepted there. So I get up to the register, and of course, I mean, you can only imagine you're in Wisconsin in the liquor area, so the line is literally like the beast at Kings Island, right? And
yeah,
so
1,000%.
So I'm standing there, and the lady says, "Oh, sorry there, honey, it's debit only or cash." Well, I don't have my debit card, and then I think to myself, you know what? I keep a little small cash reserve in my car for emergencies. And this is typically for like flat tires or running out of gas, but it's been there for like 5 years. And I think, well, Joel Erickson's beer. I mean, what bigger emergency is there than that? So I go and I get it, and I also had to buy 2 tubs of a cheese spread for my parents' neighbor that's from Wisconsin. So I go and I get it, and voila, I'm 48 cents short. Okay, I'm 48 cents short.
Okay.
I'm now panhandling, walking up to people asking if they have spare change that I can put in the little machine in order to free me from this liquor store jail that I'm in with like 20 people waiting in line, and nobody carries cash, right?
Right.
So nobody has it, and they're literally people are going around and they're looking underneath bins for loose change. I finally got it, and then I go to my car, but the bag that I had that I'm carrying your Carry the G beer and everything else in is a plastic bag. It rips. The cheese tubs of cheese spread fall out onto the ground. I think I have both of them corralled back into my car along with all of your precious beer. I pull away. I hear what I think might be a small bomb and look back, and there is Cheese Whiz that has now completely covered the Honda Civic next to me because I ran over the Cheese Whiz, but I don't have any money and or cards to go in and get it for Amy to get her more Cheese Whiz. So your Carry the G survived. Your Spotted Cow survived. The Cheese Whiz has now made itself into official Wisconsin roadkill, which, if we know anything, so long as it's been there for less than 36 hours, does become dinner in Wisconsin, and then your beer made it home. So there you go. That's the dedication that I have.
Well, that story doesn't surprise me on 3 levels. Number one, you're absolutely right about the size of the beer in the liquor part of the Get grocery stores. It's basically an extra store that
Yes,
you walk through a door.
it's impressive.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just like your average grocery store, too. They're not special ones. It's all of them. So that's number one. Number two, very unsurprised that people were helping you try to find loose change.
Right, especially when they knew it was for beer. Oh, he might invite us over.
Yeah, exactly. And number three, in Kenosha, understand it, no one carries cash anymore. If you've been up by where I'm from, though, someone would have had cash for you. There's up by where I'm from, there's still the people who are like, I don't know if I can trust those.
Just so you know,
I don't know if I can trust those banks.
I got home at 2:00 in the morning because I was actually at Woodman's for 4.5 hours to get your beer. So there you go.
You dropped it off late at night. It really was a beer ferry situation.
Yes, I know.
It was absolutely. The listeners should know. You dropped it off late at night. It was like a present waking up the next morning. You go outside and there's beer on the front porch. If anybody else wants to leave beer on my front porch in the morning, that's great.
That's right. Well, I'm going back up in December for our annual Milwaukee Christmas trip. So go through your spotted count now because I'll load up when I come back again. And this time it'll be the Beer Santa Ferry that will show up. So just don't feel like you got to pace yourself, Joel, because we appreciate the time.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Jake.
All right. That's Joel A. Erickson there. He's one of the good ones from up here around our parts in the North Timber. I do like doing my Wisconsin voice, Eddie, just so you know. You know what I mean? Did you get Jimmy's picks of the day, plays of the day?
I did, I think.
Greenfield Signs?
I think so.
You know what I love about Greenfield Signs?
What do you love, Jake?
Jimmy's play of the day.
You love that they sponsor them?
I do love that.
Is there anything else you love about them?
When we went over there to meet those fine folks that can, accommodate whether you're talking about the big signs that are in front of IU Indy or just simple signs in the inside of a building, whatever it might be, a family-owned business that's based right here in Indianapolis but starting Greenfield, thus the name of it, met one of the young kids that is part of the family, Lucas, who's part of the family that does Greenfield Signs. He's volunteering at a school for Special Olympics.
Oh, really?
Helping out with the kids at Special
How about
Olympics.
that?
I'm telling you. See, and those are the kind of people that you're happy that you support them, by the way.
It's like a full circle.
It is. Hey, Jake, my wife's from Michigan, and all her uncles sound just like that guy. Yeah, I'm telling you. Oh, that's right. When my roommate from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, I would say his name. I don't want him to be embarrassed because I'm making fun of his accent. But he came back. He went home one summer and came back and said, "Oh yeah, there's some jerky." His accent wasn't as bad because he'd been in Indiana for a while, but his family was like, "Holy cow!" He brought back jerky once, and I was eating it. I'm like, "This isn't bad, but it seems it's just a little bit. Is it stale? It seems a little tougher than usual." He said, "Oh, it's squirrel." Excuse me? That's squirrel. This is squirrel?
Wonder if you got that at Buc-ee's.
Probably, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. You can do that now. He also said that if they would find, like, if you hit a deer within, like, 6 hours of it, you could say, "Oh, you could say, plenty of good venison there." Okay. It's a different world. I'm just telling you. It's a different world. But you said Jimmy did do plays of the day?
Yes.
All right. We'll get through that in about 20 minutes. And we need to check, speaking of beer, on our baseball beer bet because some strange things are afoot.
Why do we need to check this, Jake?
I'll tell you on the other side. way, I mentioned earlier today, it's not lost on me, obviously, that today is September the 11th. And while I can appreciate that with each year, it does get further removed from the atrocities of that day 23 years ago, it's not to say that we forget about it. I always marvel at the fact, marvel's maybe the wrong word, but it always strikes me. And I know that meteorologically it makes sense why the weather would be the same every year on September 11th. But, we very seldomly have like rainy or overcast days on this day. And if you go to the 9/11 Memorial in New York City, they have on the wall a mural of like 1,000 different shades of blue in tile, because they asked a bunch of different people what their recollection is of how blue the sky was that day in New York, and really across the country. And the weather here has almost annually been identical to the day in 2001 on the 11th of September in terms of the pitch of blue of the sky and the golden hue of the sun. It was a beautiful day. And we all have our own personal memory or recollection or connection with what took place on that day. I mentioned off the top of the show that I did not personally know anyone who was lost on that day. I know people who ultimately ended up becoming lost, if you will. I have a cousin that worked in the World Trade Center that lost several coworkers, and it sent my cousin into terrible, terrible challenges emotionally and mentally in his life. But in terms of people that were lost that day, I always go back to Melissa Dwy, who was the one woman whose 911 call got out. There are several whose 911 calls have been released, of course, but she was inside the World Trade Center, and in that moment called a 911 operator and asked that the 911 operator get a hold of her mom to let her mom know how much she loved her. And that always struck a chord with me, because in those moments, it wasn't bills to be paid or, job situations or other such things that she was worried about. You think about those that love you and those that you love. And I just thought that I have always felt that Melissa Dwy was symbolic of a little bit of who we all were in that moment. And I think as important as it is to remember what this country saw in terms of our vulnerability in being attacked, the most important thing is to remember it was the ugliest of days in American history, and it was the precipice of, in many ways, some of the most triumphant. Because I don't know that this country has ever been. I was not alive for Pearl Harbor. I was not alive for, the V-Day after World War II. But at least of my era, I've never seen the country more unified. And we were all on the same team for quite some time after that. And I think it's important in not only remembering the people that were lost, but also in remembering the spirit that was captured, and hoping that we can recapture that spirit as a country, and the greatest country in the world, still today. Eddie, Major League Baseball, we had the bet that we made between the two of us, the three of us, actually, Jimmy as well, on which team.
You had it right, the two of you.
That's true.
You had it right.
The way that we did it was at the beginning of the year, we took the teams that were predicted to win, basically 500 or under, and which one we thought would win the most games. Jimmy took the Cleveland Guardians, who've had a remarkable year. They're 83-62. They lead the Central. I took the Milwaukee Brewers, that technically are ahead in our wager because they're 83-61. They lead the NL Central. So they're a half game up. But Cleveland currently is, I believe, in the amidst a set with the White Sox. So just, chalk that up.
And
right?
I took the LA Dodgers, right?
That's right. You took the Florida, don't call me Miami, don't call me Florida Marlins, who are 54-91. So you're a little off. Now, Eddie, you are the baseball enthusiast of the program,
yes.
So I am going to challenge you with this. I'm going to ask that you please don't look at your computer screen. Okay? Can you tell me right now, as it stands, if the Major League Baseball season was to end today, which it does not, but if it did for the sake of the conversation, because we're getting close, tell me the 3 divisional winners and the 3 wild cards in the National League.
National League, so you're looking at the Phillies for the National League East, NL Central is the Milwaukee Brewers.
Yep.
Then the NL West would be the Dodgers.
Okay, 3 wild cards.
3 wild card teams, not in particular order because I can't remember. The San Diego Padres.
You're looking at something.
No, I'm not.
I need eye contact here, please.
I'm
Okay, go ahead.
Picturing in my mind.
Okay, go ahead.
San Diego Padres.
Okay.
Arizona Diamondbacks.
Okay.
The third one is where I get tripped up. I want to say
Eye contact up here, please.
I want to say
Looking at the
Atlanta,
screen.
but they've faded a little bit. I'm going to stick with them. I don't know who that third team is.
Atlanta is currently tied in terms of wins and losses, but they must have a tiebreaker between themselves and the New York Metropolitans.
That's right.
The New York Mets, who, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, there's an NY and an M in the New York Met logo. Might have mentioned that before. Okay, now, the American League. Eye contact, please. Tell me right here. The 3 divisional winners and the 3 wild cards in the American League.
I believe one of those divisional winners is Cute Fella.
Okay.
Am I incorrect there?
Hey, just root for me. You are incorrect.
Okay, then it's the Yankees.
Correct.
I know they're back and forth. So the Yankees for the AL East. AL Central is the Houston Astros.
Central?
Central, no. Central would be the Cleveland.
Correct.
And then Minnesota's in the wild card. And then you've got Houston
Correct.
for the West.
You're missing a wild card team.
The other wild card team is...
I think the easiest to overlook because it's like, wait, what?
Is it Kansas City, or are they still right there?
Kansas City. Kansas City at 80 and 66, 14 games over 500. Now, are they 14 games over 500 or 7? That's the million-dollar question. But that's impressive. Or 4, I guess it would be. But Kansas City, though, a month ago, I didn't even hear about Kansas City. Now, all of a sudden, here they are.
Yeah, they've had a really good year with Bobby Witt. He's been in the conversation for American League MVP, but it's been overshadowed just by the numbers that Aaron Judge has put up this year. Bobby Witt's been one of the best players in Major League Baseball. He's been one of the best players, probably the best player in Major League Baseball since the All-Star break.
Okay, of those teams that I mentioned, which one would be the coolest story if they actually won the World Series?
Are you talking about either division or conference or whatever?
Of the teams
league?
that we just mentioned that right now would be scheduled to go to the postseason, the one that would be like the coolest story. Philly, Dodgers, Milwaukee, San Diego, Arizona Mets, New York, Cleveland, Houston, Baltimore, Kansas City, Minnesota.
I'd probably have to say Baltimore.
I would agree with that. I think most people would feel that way, right? Because it's a historic stadium. It's a historic franchise for sure.
Yeah.
And they've been pretty good for a decade now. They've had some pretty good teams.
And they
were
had
terrible before that.
Yeah, I was about to say pretty much the post Cal Ripken days, they had not been good.
At one time, the Baltimore Orioles had the best winning percentage in baseball history. I think, right?
That's a good question. I don't know that one.
I think that's right. And it was not spectacular, but they were, historically speaking, their wins and losses was like 5-10, and I mean, Houston, nobody wants to see Houston because they bang on trash cans and they've been around forever. The Guardians are cool. Nothing against the Guardians. Yankees, yeah, whatever. Everybody likes the Yankees.
Cleveland could be a good story in that aspect, too, because I think they're one of the longest franchises without a championship.
Well, they're currently the longest of teams that have won a World Series. They currently have the longest drought, correct?
Yeah, because I remember a few years ago in 2016 when the Cubs won it.
Well, of course, yeah. That was the thing, right?
Yeah.
The Phillies. The Phillies look. They got exciting players. There's no question about it. But they're just kind of right. The Dodgers are very cool, but they've been around for. I mean, the Dodgers. I could see a fatigue factor for that. Milwaukee, I think, would be cool for people because it's different, even though they've been good for a couple of years now. San Diego would be cool, even though nobody's actually a diehard Padres fan. Arizona is literally like the IKEA of baseball franchises. I mean, it's just like, you know what I mean? And then I think the Mets are cool because they have a cool song.
Oh, yes.
Meet the Mets, greet the Mets, step right up and meet the Mets. The Mets are kind of cool. And when I was an intern in New York City, myself and 4 other interns living in my building from around the country, we were like, let's go to the Mets game this weekend. So we bought cheap seats, went to Shea Stadium. It was free duffel bag day.
Oh, nice.
So I got a little MetLife duffel bag that has Snoopy wearing a Mets hat. I think I still have the bag. Couldn't find it within myself to ever get rid of that. And on that day, by the way, a guy fell on the escalators at Shea Stadium.
Really?
non-fatality, but not a good scene. But did not pass away, fortunately. But it was quite the scene. That's a fun little jingle. Can you play a little more of that?
Yes, sir.
We'll do this leading up to Jimmy's Plays of the Day, which are coming up, right?
That is correct.
All right, Jimmy's Plays of the Day brought to you by Greenfield Signs are next. And play a little of this fabulous 60s jingle. By the way, I mentioned
Today's Plays of the Day brought to you by the fine folks at Greenfield Signs and Lighting. Greenfield Signs, a professional comprehensive sign company with 2 locations in central Indiana. They'll take your signage ideas and take hold of the project from design all the way to delivery. Family owned and managed for more than 4 generations. You don't often get a second chance to make a first impression. Make the most out of your first opportunity with Greenfield Signs and Lighting. For more information, go to greenfieldsigns.com. Today's plays are focused entirely on Major League Baseball. We'll start first by laying 1.5 on the run line for the Philadelphia Phillies as they host the Tampa Bay Rays. A little bit later tonight, we'll take the Atlanta Braves to win on the money line over the Washington Nationals. First pitch, 7:05 between the Royals and the Yankees. We'll take Kansas City to win on the money line over New York. Last one for you. Give me cute, fella.
Hey, root for me.
The Baltimore Orioles to win on the money line over the Boston Red Sox. Eddie, if there's any plays from you, let's go now. If not, those are your plays of the day.
No plays for me today, Jake. By the way, I'm sure Jimmy was thrilled. He bet the Royals yesterday, and they shut out the Yankees. They just absolutely clobbered them. It was like 14-0. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
John, you got any plays of the day?
Do not. I never have any plays of the day, although I did last week have the Patriots and the points over the Bengals. That was a pretty damn big deal right there for a guy that doesn't bet too often. Big deal.
By the way, I didn't realize that show my ignorance here, I guess. New England obviously drafted a quarterback, but they're still going with Jacoby Brissett.
They are.
I did not realize that.
Yep. Drake May sits on the bench.
I saw a video yesterday of, Drake May was, who knows, maybe he will, they're bringing him along slowly. I have no idea, but, he's got a huge arm, no question about that. But
yep.
We'll
the Bengals, Eddie could tell you that, didn't look ready for prime time at all.
Well, that's what they always do. They do that every year, and we always do the same song and dance. They always lose week 1, they lose week 2, then they're back to on track week 3. That's what they do.
Garrison's Bengal fandom.
What'd you say?
Frustration setting in.
Olivia is.
Okay.
So I hear about it all the time.
Fair enough. John, what you got lined up on the big show? I love the Bucko Bruce shirt.
Oh, you like that, do you?
It's awesome.
Why do they not utilize this all the time? Awesome. Just so stupid in Tampa. This is classic. The creamsicle.
It's great.
Come on. Who do you think of when you see this?
Doug Williams.
Do you?
What about you? Ricky Bell?
Leroy Selman.
Yeah.
Probably.
Hard to argue that.
Yeah, I was also going to say, wasn't Gary Anderson there for a minute too? Remember the running back everywhere. Gary Anderson? Oh, had the big Jerry curls going too, man.
Okay.
But I also remember him with the Chargers, so he had.
Now, who's the other one? Hugh Green, wasn't he there?
Yeah, Hugh Green.
Yeah. They had good defensive players, but I had, when I was in 1979 when I first started collecting them, I still have this actually. I had a Doug Williams football card, and it had the Bucko Bruce down at the bottom. And
Steve Young.
Yeah. Vinny Testaverde.
Yeah, Vinny was there too.
Great teams. What you got lined up on the big show today?
Charles Arbuckle, who played at UCLA, who does college football, is going to join us. We'll talk about that matchup with IU and a lot of other stuff going on in college football. Purdue, Notre Dame, I'm sure, with Charles. What else we got over there, James?
We got Boyd, we got Bowen, and then we got Pete Dougherty of the Green Bay.
Boyd and Bowen and some guy named Pete. So it's going to be outstanding today,
guy
man.
Named Pete. From Green Bay, though, right?
Yeah, I'm excited. James is killing it. Well done,
He's from
James,
where?
over there.
Jake, he's from where?
He's from Green Bay there. Hey, Pete's going to be on the J&B show there. That guy's great. We had a couple of cold ones with him one time, and he likes the Rhinelander.
You like Wisconsin, don't you? You like the state.
I wouldn't want to live there because it's, I don't like cold weather. But, yes, in the summertime, I do like it.
So we live here, and there's cold weather here. It's just a different level of cold there, right?
A different level of cold, yes. But Milwaukee is a cool town.
If you had a choice, would you live here or someplace else because of the cold weather? Do you want to go someplace else?
No, for right now, no. I love Indy, man. I'll always live here, but at some point it would be nice to live like in the wintertime if I knew that I could always come back here and have a place here. What about you?
If I did, my mom would kill me. So
well, that's obviously I'm
your
thinking
parents
way
would,
long term,
my
like
mom
when we're old, right?
It's hard enough the way that it is to keep her from killing me. So we'll need to add that to the equation.
I talked to somebody yesterday that was down in Odin, and
why not the meat locker down there, baby?
That's right.
They get the marinated turkey.
No, they didn't go to the Odin meat locker.
What?
I'm like,
you can't go to Odin without going to the meat locker.
I know.
They go to the Dutch Pantry, which is the Amish place down there, which is awesome.
Yes, that is where they went.
When I wasn't on this particular diet, I go down there all the time to get, the full moon Colby cheese, the full moon. That stuff's legit. This, rubbery, waxy stuff you get up here is lame, but that stuff is legit. Just off the diet right now. If it's not tuna, it's not me, boys. You guys got any tuna?
Fair enough. I do like tuna.
No?
I do like tuna.
You got to have flavored tuna? Albacore? I eat it out of the can.
Thanks.
Yeah,
I eat it out of the can like I'm a feline.
Water or oil? Which do you go with?
I like the oil better, but I'll do the water because apparently the calories are lower, right? Isn't that great? What world am I living in
Well, John, you look good, man. I can tell you've lost a little weight. You look good in the Bucko
I played
Bruce
basketball
shirt.
until 11:15 last night, too. I sucked so bad. I was just cussing like you would not believe. And then Laney had basketball practice at CG this morning at 6. I had to get up at 4:30.
Well, all right. At least didn't include a big breakfast, I guess.
No, yep.
All right. John's up next.
You got boys.
Including a guy named Pete out there from Green Bay. And we'll be back with you at noon tomorrow. Thanks for listening to Aquarium Company.